Hey Crime Whisper family, I know many of you are watching this as you wind down for the night, letting these quiet, haunting stories guide you to sleep. Before we begin tonight's case, I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us keep whispering the stories that deserve to be remembered. Now, let's drift into tonight's case. Story begins. Corey Day Desmond was born on March 18, 1980, at Torrance Memorial Hospital in California, and right from the very beginning, Corey was a fighter. She entered the world with a hole in her diaphragm, life-threatening condition that required multiple surgeries. Doctors gave her just a 20% chance of survival, but somehow, against all odds, Corey survived. Not just survived, she thrived. Friends and family described her as brilliant, bold, and full of life. She was a woman who stood her ground and spoke her mind, yet radiated kindness and affection. She had a presence you couldn't ignore. Corey graduated from North Torrance High School and later earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Long Beach State. But despite her academic achievements, she felt drawn to something different. She shifted paths and set her sights on becoming a teacher, specifically one who would support and nurture autistic children. Just a week after her tragic death, a letter arrived in the mail. It confirmed what she had worked so hard for. Corey had officially earned her teaching credential. She never got to see it. Corey was loved by many and had friends everywhere she went. She had a sweetness to her, but also a toughness. She could command a rowdy bar with a sharp glance, or get the whole room singing with her renditions of Black Velvet or These Boots Are Made for Walking. She was magnetic, confident, the life of the party. In 2009, Corey was working at a bar. It was Saturday, February 14th day. Her shift ended around 9:30 p.m., and she walked a couple of blocks to another popular spot, the Street Lounge. Her friends worked there, and it was common for her to stop by, help out, and hang around after hours. Security cameras captured her at the bar that night. She was laughing, helping friends, chatting with regulars. She stayed until closing time, about 2 a.m. After that, Corey vanished. Discovery 2 days later. On Monday, February 16th, at around 2:20 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office received a chilling call. Roughly 100 miles from the bar where Corey was last seen, a man had pulled over on the roadside to remove snow chains from his tires, but as soon as he stepped out of the car, he was overwhelmed by a foul, disturbing odor. Thinking he might have stumbled upon a dead animal, he went to investigate, but what he found was far worse. Near the roadside, hidden inside a black plastic garbage bag, was the body of a woman. Panicked, and with a dead phone battery, the man ran into the road, waving down drivers until someone could call for help. Fingerprint analysis confirmed it. The body was Corey Desmond. She had been brutally attacked. Her cause of death was strangulation. Her face and neck were bruised, and the back of her head bore signs of trauma. She had fought hard. Defensive wounds showed that she resisted. Her pants had been pulled down to her knees, but medical examiners found no evidence of sexual assault. They estimated Corey had been left on that roadside for anywhere between 12 to 36 hours before she was found, and the location where she was discovered wasn't where the murder happened. The killer had dumped her body there, hoping the rain and remote area would delay anyone from finding her. It almost worked. Family's pain and determination. Corey had been living with her grandmother at the time when the devastating news reached her. She was in disbelief, but it was Corey's father, Mark Desmond, who refused to let the system slow things down. He knew all too well how investigations could get tangled in red tape, delayed by warrant procedures, bureaucratic steps, and backlogged evidence processing. So, Mark took matters into his own hands, motivated by love and a need for justice. He began his own search. He quickly located Corey's Jeep Wrangler abandoned in an alley behind the bar where she had worked. He also discovered that she had disappeared on the night of February 15th. Her grandmother hadn't reported her missing right away. Corey was an adult, often working late, sometimes staying with friends. It wasn't until she missed an entire day without any word that alarm bells started to ring. Investigation begins. Detectives visited both bars that Corey had frequented that night. Staff and patrons remembered her clearly friendly, helpful, and part of the bar family surveillance footage confirmed she'd been at the street lounge until closing. She left around 2 a.m. And then nothing. No one saw her again. Sometimes, when alcohol flows, emotions overflow. And people lose control of their behavior that night. Corey Desmond had the misfortune of crossing paths with just such a man. Witnesses at the bar remembered the moment clearly. A visibly intoxicated man had begun harassing female patrons, touching them inappropriately, making crude remarks, and invading their space, while most people kept their heads down. Afraid to intervene, Corey didn't stood up. She confronted him calmly, but firmly telling him he wasn't welcome, and that his behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The man grew furious, but in the end, he was asked to leave the bar, and he did. Corey, ever composed, returned to what she was doing, pouring drinks, helping her friends, smiling. She had consumed some alcohol that night, but her behavior remained steady and controlled. 2 a.m., Corey left the bar alone, intending to go home. She never made it by the following day. Her body was discovered over 100 miles away, abandoned on the roadside in a plastic garbage bag. Mark's plea, and the first suspect, Corey's father, Mark Desmond, wasn't going to wait in silence. He gave the police everything he had found on his own. Then he turned to the public, pleading on television for anyone with information to come forward. Investigators, meanwhile, quickly tracked down the man Corey had argued with that night. During questioning, he claimed he had no idea who Corey Desmond was. However, he didn't deny the argument at the bar on February 14th. He admitted that alcohol had clouded his judgment and confirmed he was thrown out. Shortly after, he insisted he went home afterward and went straight to bed. The man agreed to a full search of his home and car, and even took a polygraph test. Forensics combed through his vehicle, hoping to find a trace, hair, blood, fibers, something, but they found nothing. His home was clean, too, and when he sat for the polygraph, he passed without difficulty. His wife confirmed his alibi, saying he arrived home before 2 a.m. Before Corey even left the bar, police had no choice but to clear him as a suspect, but that left them with no new leads, no answers, a disturbing detail, and a timeline gap. Investigators continued, digging into Corey's last known movements. The owner of the bar where she worked provided a troubling piece of the puzzle. He said Corey had returned around 2:20 a.m., asking to use the restroom, but since the bar had already closed, he told her no and advised her to head home. That was the last confirmed interaction. Corey never got in her car. She never made it home. It's likely she was abducted, possibly assaulted somewhere near her place of work, but there were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and at that hour, the streets were silent. Toxicology reports revealed Corey's blood alcohol level was over 4 times the legal limit for driving. It's unclear if she planned to drive home. Moore was looking for another way. Whatever the case, she never encountered anyone that night who could help her. Billboards and a break in the case. Weeks passed. The investigation stalled. Every lead was followed and faded, but Mark Desmond refused to let his daughter's story disappear. He took a bold step. He rented 3 large billboards on Aria Boulevard in Redondo Beach. Each one bore a photo of Corey and a haunting question: who killed Corey Day Desmond? He also offered a reward, $155,000, for any information that could help solve the case. I'm going to keep them up. Mark said people need to know. The guy is still out there. Maybe it'll save someone else. The campaign drew comparisons to the story of Alexander Kemp, another case where a father's relentless efforts and public billboards led to justice. In Corey's case, the approach worked. Her photo began appearing on 50 digital billboards across the area. Then, in May 2009, the phone rang at the police station. The caller's voice trembled. "My name is Tiffany," she said softly. "I think my boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, killed that bartender girl, Corey Day Desmond. Please look into him. He's been acting strange. I'll tell you more when we meet." Tiffany's terrified confession. Tiffany sounded fragile, anxious. She called several times, before finally agreeing to meet a detective in a public park. When they sat down, she began to speak hesitantly at first, then more clearly. She and Tony had planned a romantic evening on Valentine's Day. She had made all the arrangements, booked a sitter, visited a salon, bought a brand new red dress. Red was Tony's favorite color. It drove him wild. He had to work that day, but promised to be back by evening. Part 3. The truth comes to light. Tony Lopez Perez came home around 4:30 a.m. on February 15. Tiffany, his longtime partner, had waited for him all night. She'd tried calling him, texting, no response. When he finally walked through the door, he acted as if nothing had happened. He simply told her he'd been too drunk to drive and had fallen asleep in his car, but something felt off. Tiffany noticed other things too. Tony, who rarely cleaned anything, suddenly bought an entire set of car cleaning supplies. He scrubbed the interior of his white Dodge obsessively and didn't let her help then. Just days later, he sold the car for almost nothing, no explanation. He bought another car soon after, and oddly changed his phone numbers still. Tiffany didn't want to believe anything was wrong. That changed when they took a drive together. They were heading toward Big Bear Lake when Tony suddenly pulled over to the side of the road. He sat in silence for a moment, then turned to her and asked, "Do you think this is where that dead girl, the bartender, was dumped?" "I'm almost sure this is where the cops found her body." It chilled Tiffany to her core. They had lived together for nearly 4 years. They had a 6-year-old son. She knew Tony as a hardworking man with no criminal history. He had grown up in a big family, attended high school in Manhattan Beach, and worked steady jobs. Nothing about him had ever hinted at darkness, but that day, his absence, the obsessive car cleaning, the cheap sale, the strange question by the roadside, all of it began forming a picture Tiffany could no longer ignore. She picked up the phone, undercover strategy, and new evidence. Police took Tiffany's warning seriously, but to arrest Tony Lopez Perez, they needed more than suspicion. Detectives paid Tony a visit under the pretense of conducting routine interviews. Tiffany, cooperating with investigators, pretended to know nothing. Tony remained calm and collected. He answered every question without hesitation. He claimed he'd never met Corey. Desmond only seen her photo in the papers, but detectives weren't done. They found the man who had purchased Tony's white Dodge after the murder. That buyer agreed to let police inspect the car. Tiffany had told them it had been scrubbed clean still. Forensic experts sprayed the interior with luminol and scanned it under UV light. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The interior lit up bright blue, revealing the presence of blood, long since cleaned but never truly gone. Tony's confession. Police called Tony back to the station. This time, they didn't tip their hand at first. He repeated the same story. He had never met Corey, but when investigators confronted him with the luminol findings from his old car, Tony changed his tune now. He said he had seen Corey. He claimed she was outside the bar, standing under a streetlight, when she suddenly collapsed. He approached to help her, but she didn't respond. He said he lightly slapped her cheeks to wake her up, and when she did, she began screaming, demanding that he leave her alone. Panicking, Tony claimed he put his hands over her mouth to calm her. He said he accidentally strangled her. He was scared, drunk, confused, so he placed her in the back seat of his car, drove home, and left her body there while he slept. In the morning, he went to work with Corey's body still in the car after his shift. He placed her in garbage bags and drove her out to a desolate roadside, where he dumped her body. He insisted it was a terrible accident, but the evidence told a different story. The evidence speaks. Corey's autopsy revealed far more than accidental. Suffocation coroner Jack Sheridan testified that Corey had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head and face. She had been strangled. Her body bore deep bruises and defensive wounds, proof that she had fought back there. Were also abrasions and scratches, suggesting she had been dragged post-mortem. When Corey's body was found, her pants had been pulled down to her knees, though there was no confirmed evidence of sexual assault. Still, Prosecutors argued that Tony had attempted to force himself on her in the early hours of February 15, 2009. The evidence was overwhelming. Corey's blood was found inside Tony's old car. He had confessed, even if he claimed it was accidental. His story changed multiple times. The injuries contradicted everything he said. Tony Lopez Perez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Conclusion of Part 3. A woman who stood up for others, a father who never stopped fighting, and a quiet, chilling confession from a man hiding in plain sight. Justice for Corey Desmond was slow, but it came. If you're still here, watching this late into the night, thank you for listening. Let Corey's story remind us that bravery is not without consequence, but it deserves to be remembered. And forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. And if you haven't seen the story of Alexander Kemp, another haunting case where a father's love led to justice, you can click the link at the end of this video. Until next time, rest easy. And remember, every whisper has a weight, every silence hides a truth. Conclusion of Corey Desmond's case. Part 4. Tony Lopez Perez didn't get what he wanted that night. Corey Desmond resisted and, in his rage, he strangled her during the trial. Tiffany Ware, Tony's former partner and the mother of his child, took the stand. She told the San Bernardino County jury about Perez's intense, insatiable sexual appetite in the weeks leading up to Corey's death. Despite being intimate nearly every day in January and February of 2009, it was never enough for him. Tiffany also revealed a much darker side of Tony. She testified that, on 2 separate occasions, he forced himself on her while she was asleep on the couch, recovering from back pain, and sedated with painkillers. Both assaults took place shortly after the birth of their son. Tony Perez did not testify during his trial, but during sentencing, he finally spoke. He told the court that he had been raised to respect others, to love his family, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost himself. "I forgot the lessons that make me a man," he said. "A father, an uncle, someone responsible. In the end, I fell short." He repeated the story his attorney had presented at trial, that he panicked, that Corey collapsed and he accidentally killed her in fear and confusion. "I should have stepped back, cleared my head, but fear took over. I was careless," Perez said. Corey's father, Mark Desmond, didn't buy. Ith told the court that his daughter had her whole life ahead of her. At just 28, she was poised to become a teacher, someone who would have helped countless children, and now all of that was gone. Mark said Tony Perez should live the rest of his miserable life, knowing that when he killed Corey, he also destroyed his own children's future. "He is the embodiment of everything women in our society are afraid of." Even Corey's grandmother, Beverly, spoke up. "I hope he never walks free again, and I hope he suffers as much as she did." In July 2011, a jury of 6 men and 6 women found Tony Lopez Perez guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. After 25 years, Corey's family expressed deep gratitude to Tiffany Ware, whose brave call to the police cracked the case wide open. "If it wasn't for her, I don't think we'd ever have found out who did it," said family friend Leslie Schwab, who attended every day of the trial alongside more than a dozen supporters. Introduction to the Jackie Waller case, Part 1. On June 1st, the Waller family's life took an unexpected and tragic turn that morning. Jackie Waller called her sister, Cheryl. She was on her way to pick up her children from her ex-husband Clay, and planned to return home later that day. But Jackie never came back, and she never called again. As the hours ticked by, Cheryl became more and more anxious. Something felt wrong. By 7:00 p.m., unable to reach Jackie, Cheryl walked into the police station and made a bold, gut-wrenching statement. "Clay killed my sister," to the officers. This was shocking. Jackie had only called a few hours earlier. There was no immediate evidence that she was in danger, but Cheryl's words would prove chillingly accurate. A marriage built on contrasts. Jackie Waller was known for her kindness, her strength, and her unshakable compassion. When she met Clay, he stood out. He had a speech impediment that had made him a target of ridicule. People laughed at him, mocked him, made him feel small, but not Jackie. She defended him, protected him, and in her, Clay found someone who didn't treat him like an outcast. Their bond deepened, and eventually, they married. They were both around 30 years old, and shared dreams of building a big, beautiful family. They bought a small house in Sangamon View, Missouri, where Jackie threw herself into creating a warm and loving home. Her career thrived. She was reliable, intelligent, and dedicated. But Clay struggled. He bounced from job to job, never holding anything down for long, financially unstable, and emotionally distant. He showed little involvement in the household or in their future still. Jackie pressed on, determined to become a mother. She underwent fertility treatments, and when she discovered she was pregnant with triplets, her joy was immeasurable. She gave birth to 2 girls, a boy and Addison, and a boy. Maddox's life was now more hectic than ever, but Jackie never complained. She juggled work, childcare, and the household all on her own. Clay, at one point, found a job with the local sheriff's office, but it didn't last. He was fired after a year. Jackie's parents and sister often stepped in to help with the children, providing her the only real support she had. Vaven with triplets at home, Clay barely contributed. He occasionally picked up part-time work, but it never amounted to much. Jackie continued to work full-time 40 hours a week and still managed everything else. Her dedication paid off. She soon earned a management position at a local insurance branch, but Clay didn't step up. Instead, he seemed to pull further away there than appreciating Jackie. He berated her, he insulted her, calling her worthless and claiming no one else would want her. His behavior turned emotionally abusive, and his infidelity added salt to already open wounds. Jackie's parents and sister urged her to leave, but she held on, hoping to salvage what was left of their marriage. Cracks deepen and collapse over the years. Their financial strain worsened. Jackie's income alone couldn't sustain the family anymore. The mortgage piled up, and eventually, they lost their home. Jackie made a tough decision. She moved in with her sister Clay, unwilling to follow. Moved in with a friend at this point. The children were a little older, but Jackie still shouldered all the responsibility. Every day was a delicate balance of work, motherhood, and trying to heal from the emotional weight Clay had left behind. Yet, when she went to pick up her children that June afternoon, she never came home. Jackie had finally made the difficult but necessary decision to file for divorce. She believed that both she and her children deserved a better, safer life. When she told Clay about her decision, he initially remained calm, but that calm quickly unraveled soon. His demeanor shifted, and the threats began quiet at first, then more direct. He warned Jackie that divorcing him would be like signing a death warrant, not just for her, but for their children as well. These chilling threats terrified Jackie, but she remained determined. She could no longer live under the weight of fear, seeking protection. She confided in her family and began keeping a diary, documenting Clay's increasingly erratic and threatening behavior. She even suspected he had started stalking her for her safety and that of her children. Jackie moved in with her sister at the time. The triplets were only 5 years old, too young to understand the storm that was gathering around them still. Jackie did her best to explain that the arrangement was temporary and necessary over time. Things seemed to settle. The divorce process was nearing its end. Clay appeared to accept the separation, and his harassment tapered off. Both began moving on, seeing other people. Rebuilding. Jackie granted Clay visitation rights, and their interactions became less volatile. In June 1st, 2011, Jackie and Clay met at their attorney's office to finalize the last details of the divorce. That day, their son Maddox was visiting Clay, while the 2 girls remained with Jackie's sister, Cheryl. After leaving the office, Jackie called Cheryl to let her know everything had gone smoothly. She mentioned she was on her way to pick up Maddox and would return home shortly. That call would be the last time anyone heard from Jackie. As time passed, and Jackie failed to return or answer her phone, Cheryl's worry grew into dread. She tried calling both Jackie and Clay, but received no response. Convinced something was terribly wrong, Cheryl sent Clay a text. "If I don't hear from Jackie in 5 minutes, I'm going to the police almost instantly." Clay called back. He asked what was going on, trying To sound surprised, Cheryl didn't mince words. She told him she believed he knew exactly what was happening. Clay denied everything he claimed he hadn't seen. Jackie said that if he did, he would tell her to call. Cheryl, unconvinced, Cheryl took immediate action. She brought the children to her parents' house and filed a missing persons report, despite the unusual nature of her claim that Jackie's own exoskeleton had harmed her. The police took Cheryl's statement seriously. They didn't wait the typical 24 hours to begin investigating. When detectives questioned Clay, 41, he told them he and Jackie had lunch together, went to their attorney's office, and then drove to his home to talk further. According to Clay, after chatting for a bit, he went to the store. When he returned, Jackie and her car were gone. He claimed to have assumed she had simply left. Clay also offered a suspicious detail: that Maddox wasn't actually at the house at all. He said the boy was in Illinois with Clay's new girlfriend, and that Jackie had supposedly known this. He insisted she wasn't there to see her son, but just to talk. But Cheryl knew better. Jackie had made it clear her only reason for visiting Clay was to pick up Maddox. She would never have agreed to her son being far away with another woman, let alone kept in the dark about it. Clay's story didn't line up. Detectives, now more skeptical of Clay's account, launched a deeper investigation. Jackie and her vehicle were still missing, but within hours, a major clue surfaced. Her Honda Pilot was found abandoned on the side of an interstate highway. One tire had been punctured, but there were no signs of a crash. It looked staged, like someone had tried to make it appear she'd broken down. The car doors were open, and there was no sign of Jackie. What they did find, however, were bloodstains in the back seat. Small, but deeply troubling. With those findings, investigators shifted into high gear. A massive search was launched in the area where the SUV was. Discovered police officers, canine units, rescue teams, family, friends, and volunteers joined the effort, many traveling in from other counties to support Jackie's desperate loved ones. Despite the sweltering summer heat, the community came together. Jackie's family offered a $3,500 reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. But even with the intense search efforts, emotional pleas, and public appeals, Jackie remained missing. Something terrible had happened, and all signs pointed back to one person: Clay. Despite days of relentless searching, no trace of Jackie could be found. Frustrated and increasingly suspicious, police began to focus more intently on Clay. Her exhaustion. When officers visited his home for a follow-up interview, Clay repeated the same story he'd told before. However, this time, he refused to let them inspect his home or vehicle. He quickly hired a lawyer who invoked Clay's rights, preventing further questioning. Just days after Jackie vanished, Clay left her a voicemail in a distressed tone. "Hi honey, it's Sunday. You went missing on Wednesday. Please call me if you get this message. I don't know where you are, and I miss you very much." Investigators later secured a search warrant and returned to Clay's residence. What they found raised serious red flags. Inside his vehicle were suspicious stains, which forensic analysis revealed to be fish blood. Clay had deliberately poured fish blood in his car and recorded it on videos. If testing how forensic teams would respond inside his home, detectives noticed an entire section of carpet had been ripped out, leaving behind a conspicuous mark on the floor. Small blood droplets were also found on the hallway walls leading down to the basement. Further examination revealed signs that furniture had been rearranged, suggesting an attempt to conceal evidence beneath the floorboards. Investigators discovered a blood-soaked piece of carpet. All blood samples were sent for lab testing. Jackie's last known movements were traced through security footage at 10 a.m. She was seen at a drugstore with Clay. Both appeared calm. About 2 hours later, Jackie was caught on camera withdrawing cash from an ATM. That would be the final time she appeared on any surveillance footage. Clay, on the other hand, was seen hours later with his son and new girlfriend at a toy store. Afterwards, they visited a car wash in Clay's pickup truck. which contained a suspicious trash can. Clay had changed clothes by then and was seen meticulously washing both his car and his boat. Behavior that only deepened suspicions. Photos of Clay's pickup truck and boat were released to the public, and tips soon followed. A young couple reported seeing Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River around the time Jackie vanished. Investigators cross-referenced this claim with Clay's cell phone records and confirmed the location. Search efforts immediately shifted to that area, but the expansive terrain yielded no new clues. The case sparked massive public outrage. Citizens flooded the streets, demanding justice and systemic change around domestic violence response, despite denying all allegations. Jorge was arrested. He claimed he had driven Maria to work that morning, as he always did. CCTV footage did show their vehicle heading toward her office, but due to dark-tinted windows, it was impossible to tell how many people were inside, or if Maria ever got out. Investigators soon uncovered key evidence at the couple's rented home: faint traces of blood, drag marks, and signs of a violent struggle in the trunk of their car. Microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were found. Even more disturbing was their recent purchase of a double orthopedic mattress. The polyethylene wrapping had been repurposed to transport Maria's remains. Multiple neighbors testified to hearing Jorge threaten Maria in the days before her disappearance. One recalled him shouting, "If you leave me, I'll kill you and no one will ever find your body." Criminologists and investigators reconstructed the events of January 19, 2021. That night, after a violent argument, Jorge attacked Maria. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he beat her, savagely breaking her nose and inflicting a head injury, before strangling her to death with his bare hands. What made this even more horrific? Their 3.5-year-old daughter, Alice, witnessed it all. Her cries and screams were caught on audio, confirming she had seen both the beating and the murdering in an attempt to hide the crime. Jorge dragged Maria's body to the backyard, doused it in campfire liquid, and set it ablaze. But the smell of burning flesh and smoke made him panic. He extinguished the fire, wrapped the charred remains in plastic, and dumped them in a dark surveillance-free sewer, trying to fake normalcy. Jorge took Maria's phone and drove the usual route to her workplace. The next morning he called friends and family, pretending to search for her, but phone data betrayed him. GPS logs showed Maria's phone and Jorge's device traveling together all day. Even more suspicious messages were sent from Maria's phone after her death, attempting to make it seem like she was still alive. Jorge had even called the phone from his own number, trying to strengthen the illusion. Further evidence: fresh bruises and scratches were found on Jorge at the time of his arrest. Clear signs Maria fought back. The most telling was a deep scratch on his neck. Unfortunately, any epithelial evidence under Maria's nails had been destroyed in the fire, despite the defense claiming all evidence was circumstantial. The prosecution pressed for the maximum sentence. The trial was delayed multiple times due to the global pandemic. But in October 2022, Jorge was found guilty of Maria Lopez's brutal murder. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison throughout. He maintained his innocence. Custody of little Alice was granted to her maternal grandparents in their grief. They said that their granddaughter now gave their lives meaning. In September 2019, Felix posted a photo on social media with his wife Elisa, who was visibly pregnant. In the caption, he wrote, "Soon I'll meet my daddy's Princess A." A month later, he proudly announced the birth of their daughter, Miranda Vero Santiago, publicly. Felix appeared to be a devoted husband and loving father, an image of the ideal family man, but behind closed doors, he was still secretly seeing Keisha, who found it impossible to cut ties with him. Elisa later confessed that she had long suspected her husband of infidelity. Each time she confronted him, Felix would break down in tears and swear that he would end the affair. Keisha, on the other hand, tried multiple times to walk away from the destructive relationship, but Felix wouldn't let her go. He warned her that if he ever learned she was with another man, it would be dangerous for both her and the other person, Keisha, who had loved Felix since their high school years, still clung to hope. Despite everything, she had no interest in other relationships. Instead, she focused on her career, working at a veterinary medical and aesthetics center, where colleagues described her as diligent, kind, and deeply passionate about animals at home. She lived with her 2 beloved dogs and a cat in 2020. Elisa discovered incriminating messages between Felix and several women, including Kisa. Enraged, she threw him out of the house and threatened to file for divorce and restrict access to their daughter. The ultimatum struck a nerve at that time. Felix's boxing career was faltering, and the last thing he needed was scandal for a while. He truly did stop seeing Kishore, at least pretended to, but he continued to keep a close watch on her, trying to maintain control from a distance. Eventually, secret meetings resumed then. In April 2021, Keisha discovered she was pregnant. She bought a home pregnancy test, and the results confirmed her suspicions. Her first call was to her sister, who was already familiar with her difficult relationship with Felix. Kisa was 27 and had always dreamed of becoming a mother. Abortion was out of the question, even if she had to raise the child on her own. A few days later, Keisha broke the news to Felix. She hoped, perhaps naively, that he would be supportive. Instead, he became furious. He told her to go to the doctor, and if the pregnancy was confirmed, she needed to terminate it immediately. Keisha stood firm. She refused. After her hospital visit confirmed the pregnancy, Keisha obtained official documentation. She contacted Felix again, but his reaction was even more hostile. He yelled at her over the phone, demanding that she get an abortion, and claiming that an illegitimate child would ruin his already damaged public image. When she continued to refuse, he changed tactics, pretending he didn't believe her. He asked to see the medical certificate in person and arranged a meeting that evening in a busy public area. Keisha didn't find this suspicious. They often met discreetly to avoid being seen together, but a few days earlier, Felix had visited an old friend, Luis Antonio Cadiz, a machinist with connections to the criminal underworld and a history of drug activity. Felix explained the situation and asked for help handling it. Luis was hesitant. He had previous run-ins with the law and didn't want to risk prison, but Felix was persuasive. He promised that it would be quick, clean, and untraceably, and that Luis would be well compensated. Luis eventually agreed, with Luis on board. Felix called Keisha and confirmed the meeting for the night of April 29th. He told her he wanted to see the medical paperwork for himself and discuss what to do next. After speaking with Felix, Keisha phoned her sister again and shared the update. She still believed there was a chance Felix might come around and accept the pregnancy, but her sister, Lorelis, was deeply worried. She knew the threats Felix had made in the past and feared what he might do. She called their mother to share her concerns, but despite their pleas, they couldn't talk Keisha out of attending the meeting that night. Keisha drove to the meeting spot in her Kia Forte. Carrying her medical documents, Felix arrived in his pickup truck with Luis hidden in the back. Keisha got into Felix's vehicle and showed him the paperwork as before. He insisted she terminate the pregnancy. Keisha, now in tears, once again refused. The conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument. Suddenly, Felix struck her in the head with his fist, knocking her unconscious while she was still unconscious. He retrieved a syringe pre-filled with a high dose of illicit drug supplied earlier by Luis and injected Keisha. With his accomplice's help, Felix carried her to the back of the pickup truck, where plastic sheeting had already been laid out. Felix and Luis tied Keisha Rodriguez with wire and attached a heavy concrete block to her body. They then covered her with a tarp to prevent anyone from accidentally seeing her. Felix returned to his pickup truck, while Luis took the wheel of Keisha's car. Together, they drove to a remote bridge over the San Jose Lagoon, a place nearly deserted at night. There, the men forced Keisha, still alive, into the water to ensure she would not survive. They fired several test shots with the firearms they had brought, making certain no chance remained after the brutal act. Both men went their separate ways. Then lab results confirmed that the blood found in Clay's house belonged to Jackie. From that point on, police treated the case as a homicide. Clay was brought in again for questioning. but he denied killing Jackie. He claimed the blood resulted from an old domestic incident in the kitchen, without a body or definitive evidence of death. Authorities lacked the grounds to arrest Clay for murder, however. They placed him under constant surveillance, a former deputy sheriff himself. Clay understood their tactics and began playing a disturbing game of cat and mouse. He deliberately visited abandoned lots in obscure areas, trying to throw off the investigation while the community rallied to search for Jackie. Clay took every opportunity to mock and antagonize them. He would drive past volunteers and Jackie's grieving family, flash obscene gestures, and yell that they were wasting their time, that they'd never find her amid this turmoil. Jackie's sister Cheryl went to court seeking custody of Jackie's children, fearing they'd be left in the care of a man she believed was dangerous. Clay's erratic behavior backfired. Cheryl won custody furious. Clay began threatening Cheryl verbally and online. He posted ominous messages, some suggesting violence. Cheryl documented everything and turned the evidence over to police nearly 5 months after Jackie's disappearance. Clay was arrested and charged with making criminal threats. He admitted to writing the messages, but claimed he acted out of frustration and emotional pain after losing custody of his children. Police continued digging into his past and discovered additional charges. Clay had stolen $50,000 from a previous employer and had been accused of stalking. A man investigators leaned on Clay's former co-workers, hoping someone could convince him to confess or reveal Jackie's whereabouts, but Clay remained tightly of admitting to the crime. Clay offered a diversion. He claimed to know who was truly responsible for Jackie's death, a man named Harry, but detectives had already investigated this lead. Harry had a rock-solid alibi and was quickly cleared. All evidence pointed directly back to Clay, and yet the case still lacked the one thing that could tie it all together: Jackie's body. Despite persistent efforts, the search for Jackie yielded no results for several days with no leads. Police began to scrutinize her ex-husband, Clay Waller, more closely when investigators returned to his residence for follow-up questioning. Clay repeated the same story he'd given before, but this time, he denied them access to his home and vehicle, and quickly hired a lawyer who asserted his legal rights. Curiously, days after Jackie vanished, Clay left her a voicemail in a noticeably distressed tone. "Hi honey, it's Sunday. You went missing on Wednesday. Please call me if you get this message. I don't know where you are, and I miss you very much." Detectives later obtained a search warrant and returned to Clay's home for a thorough inspection in his vehicle. They discovered what appeared to be blood-like stains, however. Forensic analysis revealed the substance was fish blood. Investigators learned Clay had deliberately poured fish blood inside his vehicle and recorded the process on video, an attempt, it seemed, to confuse forensic experts inside the home. Detectives found more troubling signs. A section of carpet was missing, revealing a clear outline where it had once been. Tiny drops of blood were spotted on the hallway walls leading to the basement. Forensic investigators also uncovered a blood-stained carpet hidden beneath the floorboards, all of it raised red. Flag surveillance footage helped piece together Jackie's final movements. At 10 a.m., the day she vanished, she was seen with Clay at a drugstore. They appeared calm and composed. 2 hours later, Jackie was spotted alone at an ATM, withdrawing money. After that, she disappeared. Clay, however, was seen later that day with his son and new girlfriend at a toy store. Then they visited a car wash in their pickup truck. A trash can inside raised suspicion. By that time, Clay had changed clothes and thoroughly cleaned both his car and boat. Authorities released images of Clay's truck and boat, urging the public for tips. A young couple responded, reporting they'd seen Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River. Detectives verified this lead using Clay's cell phone records and narrowed their search efforts to the island. Yet, despite scouring the area, no trace of Jackie turned up. Eventually, forensic results confirmed that the blood droplets found in Clay's home belonged to Jackie. Police now assumed she was dead. They brought Clay in for intense questioning, hoping to secure a confession, but Clay denied killing Jackie. claiming the blood came from a past domestic incident in the kitchen, without a body or conclusive evidence of death. Investigators couldn't hold him. He was released, but kept under tight surveillance, say former deputy sheriff himself. Clay knew how to avoid detection. He led police on wild goose chases, driving to abandoned lots, switching routines, and trying to mislead investigators. Meanwhile, the community organized search parties for Jackie. Clay would taunt them, driving past with a smirk, flashing the middle finger, or yelling insults that they were wasting their time. His cruelty only heightened public outrage. Jackie's sister Cheryl fought for custody of the triplets, fearing for their safety. Clay's erratic behavior worked against him, and the court awarded Cheryl custody, a decision that infuriated him. He responded with threats, some made publicly on social media. Cheryl reported him, and police moved in nearly 5 months after Jackie disappeared. Clay was arrested not for murder, but for making threats against Cheryl. He accepted those charges, saying he acted out of grief and frustration at losing his children. Still, he claimed to be the victim. While investigating this new incident, police discovered Clay had other charges pending, including embezzling $50,000 from a former employer and stalking a man. Detectives questioned Clay's hoping he'd crack and reveal Jackie's whereabouts, but Clay held firm, now shifting blame, claiming he knew who really killed Jackie, a man named Harry. That lead to was dead. Harry had a solid alibi and was quickly ruled out, though Clay continued denying involvement. He ended up serving 5 years in prison for the threats. All the while, the case remained active. Investigators kept searching Devil's Island, hoping to uncover Jackie's remains 2 years after her disappearance. Despite the lack of a body, prosecutors made a bold move. Armed with strong circumstantial evidence, video footage, blood, behavior, they charged Clay with Jackie's murder. It was risky. If they lost, double jeopardy laws would prevent any future prosecution, but they were determined. Realizing the weight of the evidence and likely conviction, Clay finally agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would plead guilty and reveal Jackie's burial site. Her grieving family supported the deal. Above all, they wanted closure and a proper burial for Jackie. Clay led detectives to a secluded sandbar on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River. At first, he struggled to remember the precise location, but then recalled placing a bag of fertilizer atop her grave. A seasoned officer, who happened to be an avid gardener, explained that fertilizer in high quantities can kill trees. They scanned the area and identified 3 dead trees. Beneath one of them, they found Jackie's body, still dressed in the same clothes she'd worn the day she disappeared. Her identity was later confirmed through dental records. Jackie was laid to rest on what would have been her parents' 50th wedding anniversary. Cheryl broke the devastating news to the triplets that their mother had been murdered by their own father. The revelation shattered the children, who lost both parents in a single, cruel blow. From that moment, they severed all contact with Clay and refused to speak to him ever again. As part of his confession, Clay revealed that the idea of murdering Jackie had first entered his mind nearly a year before, when she announced plans to separate, though he claimed to have tried to suppress those thoughts. He also admitted to warning her that taking the children would come with dire consequences. She didn't listen, and in his mind, that made her responsible. Clay confessed that the night before the murder, he drove to Devil's Island and dug a grave the next day. After a routine legal appointment regarding their divorce, Jackie allegedly suggested they be intimate one last time back at Clay's house. An argument erupted. He claimed he accidentally bumped her nose while opening the fridge, which caused her to bleed. She stormed out, smeared blood on the walls, and screamed that he'd never see his kids again. Clay said he snapped, he hit her, then strangled her afterward. He placed her body in a trash bin and buried her in the grave he had already dug. He then cleaned the house and vehicle, showered, changed, and calmly went to a toy store to meet his son and girlfriend, despite his claim that the act was impulsive. Clay's own confession contradicted that. He had clearly planned the murder, The coroner later determined that Jackie had suffered multiple skull fractures, evidence of blunt force trauma inconsistent with a mere impulse killing. Clay showed no remorse. He seemed pleased with receiving just 20 years for second-degree murder, with a chance of early release, but prosecutors had one last strategy. Because the murder happened in Missouri and the burial in Illinois, Clay had violated federal domestic violence laws that apply across state lines. That added 35 more years to his sentence. Clay Waller must now serve 85% of his 55-year sentence before he can be considered for parole. He claimed ignorance of this law and never anticipated the full consequences of his confession in a final act of cruelty. Clay tried to profit from the tragedy by writing a book about Jackie's murder, but her sister Cheryl, who continues raising the triplets with support from their elderly parents, made sure the children know the truth, and the memory of their mother remains deeply cherished in their hearts. They mourn her loss every day and harbor nothing but resentment for the man who took her away. Jamie and Nation had plans to start a family. Their life together was vibrant and full of promise. Jamie, especially, was known among friends and family as a compassionate, joyful presence, someone whose laughter could brighten any room. Her talent and passion for politics had many convinced she was destined for a successful career, but everything changed without warning. On April 22, 2013, around 5:20 p.m., Jamie suddenly burst out of her home, running frantically for several yards before collapsing in a neighbor's yard. Her body was soaked in blood. Stunned bystanders screamed for help. A neighbor, witnessing the chaos unfold on his lawn, immediately called 911, though Jamie was barely coherent. She managed to utter a name, John. She indicated that he was still inside the house and that he had attacked her with a knife. The neighbor grabbed a towel, pressed it against the deep wounds in her abdomen, and did what he could until paramedics arrived. Police quickly followed the trail of blood back to the Han residence surrounding the house. They ordered whoever was inside to come out with their hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man stepped onto the porch. Officers noted injuries to his wrists and a stab wound to his abdomen. He was immediately transported to the hospital under police escort. On the way, the man, visibly distressed, began sobbing, repeating how he wished it had all ended sooner and that he wanted to die once stabilized. Police worked to determine who he was and why he had been in the house. They soon identified him as 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation Han and a familiar presence in the couple's lives. Jamie knew John well. He was her accountant and had recently moved from out of state. The couple had offered him a temporary place to stay while he got back on his feet. Jonathan and Nation's friendship stretched back to the year 2000, when they met during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly became close. Though they drifted apart during college, they reconnected afterward and rekindled their bond. In fact, John had stood as Nation's best man when he married Jamie in April 2009. The trio was inseparable friends, often referred to them as the Three Musketeers. John was around so frequently that neighbors assumed he was part of the family. Their bond made what happened that evening all the more shocking. As per routine, the couple had invited Jonathan over for their weekly Monday dinner that day. He arrived earlier than usual to discuss campaign work with Jamie. The Huns were deeply concerned for their friend. He had recently revealed a devastating diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. It was a blow to all of them. Nation and Jamie had been by his side at doctor's visits, offering their home, their care, and their unwavering support. At one point, Jamie had asked Nation whether they should have a baby soon so that their future child might have the chance to meet John. Their love for their friend ran that deep, but John's health history was already complicated. Years earlier, he had confided in Nation about being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder surgery. That's why they hadn't hesitated when he needed a place to recover. They were trying to help on that tragic Monday. Jamie and Jonathan were in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and went upstairs to change. Suddenly, he heard Jamie scream his name and then John's, assuming John had fallen due to his condition. Nation rushed downstairs, but what he saw froze him in place. Jamie was bleeding on the kitchen floor. John stood over her, gripping a large knife. As John advanced toward Nation, weapon raised. Nation barely had time to react. He grabbed the blade with one hand and struck John in the face with the other in a desperate attempt to defend himself and his wife. He yelled at Jamie to run despite her critical injuries. She somehow managed to stagger to her feet and escape through the side door. Nation, still in shock, shoved John aside and raced out to find her. Jamie, now outside, stumbled to a neighbor's door and pounded frantically. No one answered, summoning what little strength she had left. She ran to another house but collapsed in the yard before she could knock her. Cries drew the attention of passers-by. One neighbor ran to her, while another called for an ambulance. Nation followed the blood trail and found his wife, barely conscious and clutching her side. He knelt beside her, took her hand, and tried to comfort her with promises of healing, of future anniversaries, of peaceful vacations by the sea. But his tears betrayed the fear that none of those dreams would ever come true. As they waited for paramedics, a neighbor brought a towel and pressed it against her abdomen. Another placed her legs on a bag of leaves to keep her stable, though help arrived within minutes. Every second felt eternal. Jamie's breathing grew labored. Her injuries were grave when the paramedics finally arrived. They sprang into action. Life-saving measures were immediately administered by paramedics. Nation, who had suffered deep lacerations to his hand while struggling for the knife, also required urgent medical care. Both he and Jamie were rushed to the hospital. During the ambulance ride, Jamie lost consciousness upon arrival. She was taken directly into emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, still in shock and barely registering his own pain, received stitches. Desperate for news about his wife, he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, but was turned away. Sitting in a hospital bed, his hand bandaged, Nation could think of nothing but Jamie. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, life-threatening damage to her liver. The only thing keeping him grounded in that moment was the hope, fragile but real, that she might survive on. For a moment, it seemed she would. Jamie miraculously pulled through the surgery, but the victory was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. Just 2 days later, she succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy painted a brutal picture. Jamie had been stabbed 24 times in the face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. The fatal wounds, however, were concentrated in her abdomen and chest, causing massive trauma to her lungs and liver. Her injuries were so severe that survival had only ever been a temporary miracle. Jonathan Brill, meanwhile, had been hospitalized for 8 days due to self-inflicted wounds. On April 30th, 2013, still bandaged and visibly frail, he was wheeled into the Wake County Magistrate's office on a stretcher. There, he was formally charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Jamie Hahn and assault with a deadly weapon for the attack on Nation Hahn. Due to the seriousness of the charges, Brill was held without bail and transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, a facility with an on-site hospital wing, ensuring he would continue receiving medical care while awaiting trial. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community. People were left reeling. How could someone Jamie and Nation considered a brother, a man they welcomed into their home, supported through alleged illness, and loved as family, commit such an unthinkable act? Rumors quickly spread about a possible motive: money. During the campaign Jamie managed, over $50,000 had reportedly gone missing. Brill, who had been the campaign's accountant, had officially stepped down at the end of 2012. Still, he continued helping Jamie with financial matters and provided her with ongoing updates and reports. It's believed that Jamie may have discovered the missing funds and planned to confront Brill. That Monday night, she had invited him over, as usual, for their weekly dinner, but with the added intention of addressing financial irregularities with Nation briefly upstairs. No one knows exactly what transpired, but many believe that confrontation is what triggered Brill's deadly outburst. Nation's physical wounds gradually healed, but the emotional scars ran far deeper. 6 months later, still shattered by grief, Nation and Jamie's family scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church, a place where Jamie had volunteered and poured so much of her heart in a tragic twist. Just 1 week before the attack, Nation and Jamie had asked the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, believing he was dying of pancreatic cancer. They had no idea it would soon be they who needed the prayers of an entire community for Nation. The pain was unimaginable. He had lost his wife, his best friend, and any sense of security or trust. Jamie had been his anchor, his soulmate. He once said he couldn't understand how the sun continued to rise without her in the world. Jonathan Brill's trial began on March 4, 2015. During opening statements, the district attorney told the jury that Brill, while serving as Jamie's financial manager, had written 39 unauthorized checks to himself, embezzling approximately $50,000, the same amount that had gone missing from the campaign's books. Attempted to rationalize his actions, citing a host of alleged medical issues: multiple sclerosis, memory impairment, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Jamie, ever compassionate, had been hesitant to confront him, hoping he'd eventually come clean. But the confrontation never came until it was too late. Then came a bombshell. Medical records revealed that Brill had no history of gallbladder surgery. In fact, prior to an earlier hospitalization triggered by a suspicious episode at the Hahn residence, he had never sought medical care at all. Every story, every diagnosis had been fabricated. He had lied about everything. Part 1. The murder of Jamie Hahn. Despite life-saving measures, Nation Hahn, bleeding from severe hand wounds sustained while wrestling the knife away, was in desperate need of medical care. Both he and his wife, Jamie, were rushed to the hospital during the frantic ride. Jamie lost consciousness upon arrival. She was taken straight into emergency surgery, while Nation, still in shock and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He repeatedly tried to force his way into the ICU, desperate for any word on his wife's condition, but was denied entry as Nation sat anxiously on a hospital bed. Tormented by images of his wife's bloodied body, he clung to hope and prayer. Jamie had suffered over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and catastrophic damage to her liver. Miraculously, she survived the initial surgery, but the miracle was short-lived. Days later, Jamie Hahn succumbed to her injuries. An autopsy would later reveal 24 stab wounds scattered across her body, on her face, neck, back, hands, and arms. But it was the deep wounds to her abdomen and chest that proved fatal, tearing through her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill, couple's longtime friend, was recovering in a hospital from self-inflicted wounds 8 days after the brutal attack. On April 30, 2013, Brill, still bandaged and strapped to a stretcher, was wheeled into the Wake County Magistrate's office there. He was formally charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Jamie Hahn and assault with a deadly weapon for his attack on Nation. Given the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, where he could continue receiving medical care under supervision. Jamie's death shocked the community, not just because of the brutality, but because her killer was someone she had loved and trusted, a man she once called her best friend. In the days following the murder, whispers grew louder. Nearly $50,000 had reportedly gone missing during Jamie's campaign money that Jonathan Brill, who served as her accountant, had access to, though he officially stopped working with the campaign in late 2012. He continued managing reports and financial summaries. It's believed Jamie had recently discovered the missing funds and planned to confront him about it. The night of the attack on April 22, 2013, Jamie invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner, likely intending to have that difficult conversation. What exactly transpired during Nation's brief absence remains unclear, but what is known is that Brill snapped. Nation's physical wounds would heal in time, but the emotional scars of betrayal, loss, and witnessing the murder of his soulmate would remain forever. 6 months later, Jamie's family and Nation scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church, where she had once volunteered in. A tragic twist of irony. Just 1 week before the attack, The Hans had asked the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, believing he was battling cancer. Little did they know, they would soon be the ones needing prayers. Jonathan Brill was someone Nation had known since childhood. To have his best friend destroy his world was unfathomable. Jamie was my anchor, my backbone, my soulmate. He later said, I don't understand how the sun can keep shining without her. Brill's trial began on March 4, 2015. The district attorney revealed that Jonathan had forged 39 checks to himself, embezzling nearly $50,000, the same amount missing from the campaign. He had also lied about having multiple sclerosis, a gallbladder surgery, and terminal pancreatic cancer. Records showed no such conditions existed. Instead, Jonathan had Googled symptoms, treatments, and even cancer specialist, meticulously crafting his deception. He also searched for cruises that didn't require a passport, and had booked a one-way ticket to Las Vegas for April 23rd, canceling it just hours before the attack. When questioned, Brill admitted to stealing the money and fabricating every illness, while the Hans waited outside during his supposed medical visits. He simply wandered hospital corridors, lying to the people who loved him most. Jonathan confessed to struggling with depression and suicidal ideation. He claimed he bought the knife to end his own life, but panicked when Jamie confronted him about the missing funds as he began harming himself. Jamie tried to intervene, and that's when he turned on her in a violent frenzy. He claimed parts of the event were blacked out from his memory, though the defense argued for temporary insanity. The jury was unconvinced. Nation Han gave a powerful statement before deliberations. We lock our doors at night to keep out evil, but what happens when evil has the key? On March 19, 2015, the jury delivered its verdict. Jonathan Brill was found guilty of first-degree murder and the attempted murder of Nation Han. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Evan Brill himself later admitted, if he had just told the truth, Jamie would have forgiven him. Part 2. The tragedy of Elsie Maria Lopez. Elsie Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in the quiet town of San Cristobal, Verapaz, Guatemala, the youngest of 2 children. She was raised by loving parents, Armara and Brian Lopez, alongside her older brother, Omar, as a baby. Elsie Maria nearly died from a severe intestinal obstruction. Doctors performed a high-risk surgery, and her mother never stopped praying for her survival against all odds. She pulled throughout her youth. Elsie Maria blossomed into a vibrant, artistic soul. She excelled in sports like gymnastics and dance, and her passion for classical choreography reflected her creative spirit in academics. She leaned toward the humanities and consistently outperformed her peers. After high school, she was accepted into a prestigious state university, where she pursued a law degree, eventually specializing in criminalistics. It was during her university years that a chance encounter changed everything. While shopping for a birthday motorcycle for her brother at a dealership in Altavella, Elsie Maria and her mother met a young consultant named Jorge. Polite, well-dressed, and charming, Jorge made a strong impression, and, not just professionally, what began as a few follow-up calls about the bike soon turned into something more personal. Jorge asked Elsie Maria out for coffee, and she agreed, though he was a year younger. Their connection was instant. Within months, they were inseparable despite her parents' concerns about the relationship moving too quickly. The couple moved in together and married just 6 months later in a small, intimate ceremony. But not everything was perfect on the day of their wedding. A venue issue nearly derailed the event, forcing them to pay a hefty sum to save the celebration. Still, the two smiled through the stress. Behind Jorge's charming exterior was a more troubling story. Born in 1996 in Santa Catalina, La Tinta, he grew up poor, frequently lacking even basic necessities. Those who knew him described him as quiet, emotionally volatile, and often angry. He had few friends, didn't prioritize school, and bounced from one odd job to another. He was deeply insecure and afraid of losing Elsie Maria shortly after the wedding. Elsie Maria became pregnant without a degree and with a baby on the way. Finding work proved difficult. Jorge, meanwhile, had lost his job and showed no urgency in finding another when their daughter, Alice, was born. The financial strain only deepened, both unemployed and with no stable income. Jorge and LZ Maria Lopez found themselves struggling to pay rent or even afford basic necessities. Jorge eventually suggested they move in with his parents. Temporarily though, LZ Maria initially resisted. She finally agreed they couldn't live on the streets with a baby LZ. Maria's mother was deeply concerned, aware of her daughter's worsening situation. She often encouraged Maria to return home, but Maria kept reassuring her, insisting things would improve and that Jorge was trying. One day, her mother decided to see for herself. What she found was heartbreaking. Maria was emaciated, surviving on one meager meal a day, hardly enough to sustain herself, let alone support breastfeeding her infant daughter. Alice, worse still, Jorge's family showed little concern for Maria's well-being to them. She was an unemployed burden, not someone deserving of food or compassion. The situation inside the household was even more horrifying. Maria was regularly humiliated and physically assaulted by Jorge's younger brother, who grew agitated by the baby's crying and lashed out. On one occasion, he threw a baby bottle at Maria, struck baby Alice, who was in her arms. Jorge witnessed this, but stood by silently, never once defending his wife or child. Maria's mother, horrified, begged her daughter to leave with her and bring Alice along. Eventually, she agreed. Not long after, Jorge appeared at her parents' home, pleading with Maria to return. He promised to get a job and vowed things would be different. Maria agreed to give him one last chance on the condition they live independently, away from his family. Around this time, Maria finally defended her university diploma and secured a job with the city prosecutor's office. She was smart, disciplined, and respected, qualities that quickly earned her the admiration of her colleagues. The family's financial situation improved drastically. Entirely due to Maria's hard work, they were even able to buy a car. Jorge remained directionless. He refused to work consistently, took only temporary gigs, and relied heavily on his wife's income. He was jealous, lazy, and emotionally unstable, his explosive temper worsening with time. He began obsessively controlling Maria, demanding access to her phone, forbidding her from having friends or even lunch with coworkers. He didn't allow her to use social media and routinely checked her call records at home. He often created dramatic scenes, blaming her for all their problems. His behavior only escalated. Jorge had never defended Maria when she was mistreated by his family. At times, he too became physically abusive to him. Maria was property, someone who should endure anything he did without protest. Neighbors regularly overheard screaming from the apartment and noticed bruises and signs of assault on Maria. Despite this, she found it difficult to leave him for good. Each time she moved back in with her parents, Jorge would return days later, begging for forgiveness, and each time, against the wishes of her family. Maria forgave him on December 15, 2020, after yet another violent episode. Maria took her 3-year-old daughter and fled once more to her mother's house the next day. Jorge came after them. It was unclear whether he truly wanted to make amends or just reclaim the car. He claimed he had found a job and promised he'd never hurt her again, against her better judgment. Maria agreed to return by mid-January 2021. Maria contacted her mother in distress. Jorge had not only failed to get a job, but had stolen her salary, leaving them penniless. Her mother offered financial help and arranged to meet her daughter on the morning of January 19th, but Maria never showed up. Her mother visited Maria's workplace the following day only to learn that Maria hadn't been seen for 2 days. No one had heard from her. Disturbingly, Jorge appeared at the office too, claiming they had argued, and he thought Maria had gone to her mother's. He said she was likely ignoring his calls out of anger, but Maria's mother didn't buy it, convinced something was terribly wrong. She immediately reported her daughter missing to the police the same day. Guatemala's Alerta Isabel Claudina system was activated, a nationwide emergency alert for missing women. As the search intensified, Jorge quickly became the prime man. only suspect Maria had no enemies. Jorge was the last person seen with her. Yet he denied any involvement. He claimed to be heartbroken over her disappearance. But investigators found his statements inconsistent and evasive. He couldn't explain why he hadn't contacted the police sooner, nor why he never called or visited Maria's mother's home. Then, a grim discovery was made on January 22nd. Municipal workers responding to a blocked storm drain near a roadside uncovered a shocking sight. When they lifted the grate, they found a large black plastic bag lodged inside. Inside the bag were charred human remains. It was LZ Maria Lopez. Upon arriving at the scene, the responding officer speculated that the remains discovered in the drainage sewer might belong to El Maria Lopez, who had been the subject of a nationwide search. Forensic experts later confirmed that the charred body was indeed that of a young woman, despite the severe disfigurement caused by fire. Maria's parents and brother were able to identify her remains with certainty. The location where the body was found added another layer of tragic irony. It was the very street where Maria had worked as a prosecutor. The area lacked streetlights and surveillance cameras, making it an ideal spot for someone attempting to hide a crime, although the remains were badly burned. Forensic pathologists determined that Maria had suffered a brutal beating before her death. The cause of death was asphyxia, as indicated by internal hemorrhaging, multiple fractures sustained while she was still alive, and dried blood found in her nose and mouth. Deep marks on her neck clearly pointed to strangulation at that point in the investigation. No new suspects had surfaced, however. Maria's parents were certain of one thing: their son-in-law Jorge had murdered their daughter. Jorge was promptly taken into custody while authorities explored potential motives alongside the criminal investigation. Psychologists and criminal analysts began to examine the dynamics of Maria and Jorge's troubled marriage during this time. Maria's mother submitted a chilling piece of evidence, an audio recording that had been sent anonymously by a neighbor who was familiar with the couple's household. The neighbor had frequently overheard violent arguments and had recorded one of them, never imagining it would one day be used in a murder investigation. The recording captured Maria sobbing and crying out for help, with the sound of their young daughter weeping in the background. Maria's mother was horrified. She later said that if the neighbor had contacted the authorities earlier, her daughter might still be alive. Unfortunately, the person who recorded the audio never alerted the police, nor did they approach the family, as they remained anonymous. Investigators could not involve them as a witness. Still, the audio was included in the case file as critical evidence. In the wake of the crime, the country was gripped by public outrage. Protests erupted in cities across Guatemala, with thousands demanding justice for Maria and harsher penalties for domestic abusers. Jorge continued to deny any involvement. He claimed that on the day Maria vanished, he had driven her to work. As usual, street surveillance cameras did indeed capture the couple's car en route to her workplace that morning. However, because of the vehicle's heavily tinted windows, it was impossible to determine how many people were inside door. Whether Maria ever exited the car, none of the footage showed her entering the building. A search of the couple's home provided further incriminating evidence. Investigators discovered faint traces of blood that had been cleaned, along with drag marks indicating that a body had likely been moved. Microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were also found in the trunk of their car. Another clue came from a recent purchase the couple had made, a double orthopedic mattress. Investigators weren't interested in the mattress itself, but rather the thick polyethylene wrapping it came in. Forensic analysis revealed that this same plastic had been used to wrap Maria's remains. Several neighbors testified that Jorge had been verbally abusive and threatening toward his wife in the days leading up to her disappearance. He had reportedly shouted that he would kill her if she ever left him, and that he'd make sure her body would never be found. Based on this testimony and forensic evidence, investigators pieced together a grim timeline. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021, following a violent argument. Jorge snapped. He had always had a temper, but that night he descended into uncontrollable rage. He beat Maria viciously, striking her until she cried out for help. Neighbors heard the screams, but, tragically, none contacted the authorities during the assault. Jorge broke Maria's nose and inflicted a severe head injury, then he strangled her to death with his bare hands. Their young daughter, just 3.5 years old, was present and witnessed the entire attack. Her cries and screams were later captured in the anonymous recording in a disturbing attempt to dispose of the body. Jorge dragged Maria's lifeless form into the backyard, doused it with campfire fluid, and set it on fire, but the burning smell of flesh and hair quickly became overwhelming, and Jorge worried it might draw attention. He extinguished the fire, wrapped the partially burned body in plastic, and drove to a remote, unlit street there, believing no one would find it. He dumped the remains into a storm drain. In the days that followed, Jorge tried to fabricate an alibi. The next morning, he drove along their usual route to Maria's workplace. Pretending to have dropped her off as usual, he then began calling Maria's colleagues and family members, feigning concern and asking if anyone had seen her. The trial, however, was plagued with delays. Jorge's defense attorneys tried every tactic to stall proceedings and discredit the prosecution. They insisted all evidence was circumstantial and argued that there was no single piece of direct proof tying Jorge to the crime. They even filed to have Jorge placed under house arrest, citing his emotional distress at being accused of murdering his wife. But the evidence kept mounting, and one detail proved damning. Data from Maria's phone showed that it remained in Jorge's possession after her death. On the day following the murder, several messages were sent from her phone to friends and family, clearly in an attempt to create the illusion that she was still alive. However, digital forensics revealed that Maria's phone had been in the same locations as Jorge's phone all day, making it evident that he had sent those messages himself. Despite this, the defense attempted to twist the narrative, claiming Jorge had simply found Maria's phone and was searching for her, but the truth was clear, and it was horrifying. Upon arrival, officers from the Emergency Response Service made a grim discovery. The charred body found in a package near the prosecutor's office was initially suspected to be that of Maria Lopez, a woman whose disappearance had sparked a nationwide search. Despite the severe burns and disfigurement, forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to her. Maria's family, her parents and brother, identified her with certainty. Despite the condition of her body, the location where the remains were found, eerily close to Maria's former workplace, lacked street lighting and surveillance cameras, making it a deliberate and calculated disposal site. Pathologists revealed Maria had been severely beaten before she died. The cause of death was ruled as asphyxia. Internal hemorrhaging, multiple fractures, and dried blood in her nose and mouth all pointed to her having been alive and in immense pain during the assault. Deep marks on her neck also indicated strangulation at the time of discovery. No new suspects had emerged, but Maria's family had no doubt her husband, Jorge, was responsible. He was taken into custody as authorities began examining his motive and the toxic dynamics within the marriage. Shortly after, Maria's mother submitted a chilling piece of evidence, an anonymous audio recording sent by a neighbor familiar with the couple's household. The recording captured one of the many domestic disputes between Maria and Jorge, this one ending in Maria's desperate pleas for help. With faint sobs heard in the background, the sender never came forward, nor had they ever contacted the police, rendering them unusable as a witness. The audio, however, became part of the criminal file. Maria's mother expressed heartbreak. Someone had just made the call for help. Her daughter might still be alive. The next day, Keisha's co-workers grew concerned when she failed to show up at the veterinary medicine and aesthetics center where she worked. Known for her punctuality and responsibility, Keisha never missed work without informing anyone. Attempts to contact her by phone went unanswered, so her sister Barles was contacted after several failed attempts to reach Keisha. Barles went to her home. No one answered the door, but she had a spare key and entered the house. Inside, she found only hungry animals that had not been fed for nearly 24 hours. Realizing something terrible had likely happened, Barles immediately called their mother and then reported her suspicions and the threats against her sister to the police. She also called Felix, who insisted he had spent the entire previous evening and night at home with his family and denied attending any meeting. Mother quickly flew from Florida to San Juan, fearing that Felix might have taken her daughter to a private clinic for an abortion without her consent. She dreaded even considering the possibility that Kissia was no longer a Latpolist, began questioning neighbors and co-workers, but found no suspicious activity or useful information. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with messages about Kisha's disappearance. Urging anyone with information to come forward, the case quickly gained wide public attention, especially after it was revealed that Keisha had been in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was pregnant. Reporters swarmed the Rodriguez family for interviews. The family openly expressed their suspicions, pointing fingers at Felix. On April 30th, Kisha's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city. With her documents and personal belongings inside, there were no signs of struggle inside, offering a faint hope that she might still be alive the following day. A passerby walking over the San Jose Lagoon Bridge spotted a strange shape resembling a human body in the shallow water. The police were called and soon recovered the body of a young woman, likely Kisha. The Rodriguez family arrived to identify the body, clinging to hope it was not her, but their hopes were dashed, despite having been in the water for several days. The body was identified by a distinctive tattoo on her arm. News of the gruesome discovery shocked the city, sparking spontaneous protests, demanding justice for Keisha. That same day, Felix was detained and questioned, but vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he had been home with his family the night Keisha disappeared, with no immediate charges. He was released on his own recognizance. A key witness was Felix's legal wife, who admitted during interrogation that she knew about his affair with Keisha, but had only recently learned of the pregnancy. She also contradicted Felix's alibi, stating that he was not home on the night in question. Investigators reviewed traffic surveillance footage along the route from the city to the bridge. They found Felix's pickup truck followed closely by Keisha's Kia Ford, but the latter was not driven by her. Felix's vehicle was seized for forensic examination, and investigators found strands of Keisha's hair inside. Weiss was the first to surrender to police, agreeing to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix was also taken into custody, but refused to cooperate, remaining silent and denying guilt. Despite overwhelming evidence, authorities confiscated a firearm from Felix, a weapon he was licensed to carry, which was used to shoot Keisha from the bridge. Cell phone records confirmed that Felix, Luis, and Keisha were all at the same location on that fateful night. Keisha Rodriguez's funeral was held on May 8th, with family, friends, and supporters mourning the tragic loss of a young woman taken far too soon. The case quickly captured national attention, sparking calls for the perpetrators to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. It also served to raise public awareness about the pervasive issue of gender-based violence. Keisha Rodriguez's coffin was brought to the cemetery not in a traditional hearse but in a white carriage. As white flower petals were scattered from above the high-profile case, drew reactions from numerous prominent Puerto Rican figures, including celebrities, athletes, politicians, and public personalities who spoke out about the tragedy. Felix Vero was formally charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child. These combined charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. However, the victim's family requested that the court imposed a life sentence instead, hoping he would suffer in prison for the rest of his days due to the global coronavirus pandemic. The trial was repeatedly postponed. Eventually, in spring 2021, the court proceedings were conducted virtually. The court found that the crime was committed by multiple individuals acting in prior conspiracy and with exceptional cruelty toward a pregnant woman. The sequence of events that night was reconstructed largely thanks to the testimony of Luis, who admitted his involvement and detailed his role in procuring the drugs for the injection. as well as supplying the wire and concrete block used to dispose of the body. Despite this, Felix continued to deny any involvement, though his claims had little impact on the case. Shortly after Felix's arrest, his wife, who had testified in court, filed for divorce and distanced herself from the case, focusing instead on her business and raising their young daughter. Reports later revealed that Elisa Santiago remarried. In interviews, she admitted to receiving anonymous death threats directed both at her and at their daughter Miranda. Some speculated that these threats were orchestrated by Felix's spouse, but no evidence ever supported this theory. By summer 2023, after reviewing all evidence and witness testimony, the jury was ready to deliver its verdict. Felix Vero and his accomplice Luis Codis were found guilty on all charges. However, sentencing was still pending. With the next court hearing scheduled for mid-November 2023, it is expected that both men will receive life imprisonment without parole for the murder of Kisa Rodriguez, and her unborn child Connie Dahl was threatened with a murder charge if she did not cooperate, though she was promised a lenient sentence of manslaughter, just 1 year in jail. Detectives Strazer and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence would be used to identify the suspect. However, no DNA testing had actually been conducted on the biological samples collected from the crime scene at that time, using crime scene photos and details such as the bite mark on Jane Hilton's shoulder. Investigators fed Dahl the narrative they wanted to hear. Over the course of 4 interviews, Dahl began to falter, mixing actual memories with fabricated elements to fit the story constructed by the detectives. In one interview, Dahl claimed that Autumn, Jane's daughter, was present during the murder and had been sprayed with blood. In another, Dahl confessed that she might have been the one who bit Jane's shoulder. She alleged the murder started after an argument between Ricky Davis and Jane, triggered by Davis wanting Autumn to attend a party and Jane refusing. According to Dahl, Davis lost control in a rage, which resulted in Jane's death. However, Dahl could not recall what weapon was used or where it was hidden. Despite her changing story, Dahl firmly implicated her ex-boyfriend, Ricky Davis, as the murderer. Davis quickly became the prime suspect. Both Ricky Davis and Autumn Anchor were interviewed after Dahl's confession, but they both maintained their original versions of events. Detectives again falsely claimed that Autumn had implicated Davis, attempting to coerce him to confess. Autumn insisted she had no reason to protect Davis, despite the police threatening to charge her as well. Despite aggressive interrogation tactics, neither Davis nor Autumn changed their stories. Using Dahl's confession, police arrested Davis. Dahl accepted a plea deal and agreed to testify against Davis at his trial. The first trial ended in a mistrial, but in 2005, Davis was convicted of second-degree murder. Dahl testified that she had struggled with Jane, accidentally biting her shoulder, and then gone outside while Davis continued the violent assault. She described hearing screams and pleas as Davis attacked Jane. Based largely on Dahl's testimony, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison, while Dahl was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 1 year in county jail. Dahl later died of a drug overdose in 2014, unwilling to accept his conviction. Davis maintained his innocence. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project (NCIP) for help, founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rudolph and Wester. The NCIP assists convicted inmates seeking DNA testing to prove their innocence. After reviewing Davis's case, NCIP worked with the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office to have the crime scene evidence retested. The re-examination included Jane Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The DNA results revealed an unknown male profile that did not match Davis, Dahl, or Anchor. This proved Dahl's testimony conflicted with the physical evidence and was therefore fabricated. The results also cleared Davis's estranged husband, Archie Hilton, who had died before the findings were released. The unknown DNA profile was entered into the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, but no matches were found. though the DNA evidence strongly supported Davis's innocence. The path to overturning his conviction was complicated. California law at the time required new evidence to unequivocally prove innocence, a very high bar to meet. In 2015, false confession expert Richard Leo reviewed interrogation transcripts and concluded that detectives' methods pressured Dahl into adopting a fabricated narrative consistent with their preconceived theories. In 2016, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134, which lowered the standard for proving wrongful conviction. In cases like Davis's, NCIP attorney Melissa filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence, backed by former California State Senator Mark Leno, who championed the bill's passage in January 2017. California updated its legal standard, aligning it with 43 other states. This change paved the way for Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malaki to vacate Ricky Davis's 2005 conviction and order a new trial, initially scheduled for fall 2019. The trial was later postponed to April 2020 due to the defense attorney's health issues. However, the trial's course was about to shift dramatically. Advances in DNA testing, particularly genetic genealogy, a technique that compares DNA from crime scenes to public family tree databases, lead to a breakthrough. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched a man previously considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced that the DNA linked a new suspect to Jane Hilton's murder. Michael Green, a longtime Roseville, California resident, graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986, described by classmates as easygoing, kind, and calm. Many were shocked at the suggestion that he could commit such a brutal crime at the time of the murder. Green was just 17 years old on the night of July 6, 1985. Jane Hilton's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two friends, Calvin and Stephen, and hung out with them at a park. Autumn eventually went home for a shower before telling her mother she planned to visit another friend instead. She returned to the park to rejoin the boys. What followed remains speculative. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the Hilton home and was confronted by Jane. In the ensuing struggle, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Jane's body was later found by Ricky Davis, Connie Dahl, and Autumn. Green had no prior or subsequent criminal convictions and appeared to have led a normal life until the DNA evidence connected him to the crime. After his arrest, authorities tracked down Calvin and Stephen. While Calvin had passed away years earlier, Stephen was interviewed as a witness, not a suspect. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020, since he was a juvenile at the time of the crime. His initial court appearance was in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. Subsequently, Green was transferred to adult court to face charges as an adult. He waited over 2 years before his trial began on July 29, 2022. Green pleaded no contest, waiving his right to a jury trial and any future challenges to his plea or sentencing. His sentencing was scheduled for September 27, 2022. Presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. During sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of psychological science education, was called to explain adolescent development. She outlined how late teenagers, while capable of understanding right and wrong, often have diminished impulse controls. Several witnesses from Green's childhood testified, many maintaining contact with him into adulthood. All expressed shock at his involvement in the murder, describing him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving both before and after the crime. Green's ex, Karen Green, also spoke following witness testimonies. Jane Hilton's children presented victim impact statements, describing the profound and unforgivable loss Michael Green had caused. They shared painful memories, including the trauma of gathering their mother's belongings from the house where she was killed. Hilton's son Ian echoed these sentiments, speaking of the family's uncertainty and recurring nightmares, especially the anguish caused when suspicion was wrongly placed on Autumn, his own sister. Overcome with emotion, he broke down as he pleaded for understanding. Hilton gave the final statement, expressing her deep agony over living under suspicion. For over 2 decades, she recounted the traumatic experience of detectives confronting her accusing her of biting her mother and helping move her body, and the intimidation she endured. She added that invoking her right to a lawyer was crucial in stopping further pressure. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family, confronting Green. "What made you end Jane's life so brutally? You beat her. You kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why?" Linden stressed that Green didn't just take a life. He destroyed many in the process. He urged Green to reflect on Jane's achievements and the love she had for her children. Closing arguments, Green's defense attorney Margaret Husher emphasized his adolescent brain development, arguing he lacked full impulse control and understanding of his actions. She called for mercy, citing Dr. Kaufman's expert testimony and various legal codes. Judge Kingsbury interrupted, stating clearly that probation would not be granted, effectively ending the defense. "Is he plea?" Linden responded, calling the defense's request for probation an insult to a family that had suffered for decades. He said Green had already gotten away with murder for 37 years, and probation would mean getting away with even more. Judge Kingsbury affirmed she had heard the arguments, signaling the court's firm stance on the sentencing. Judge Kingsbury, reflecting on her 26 years on the bench, remarked that the murder of Jane Hilton was by far the most brutal case she had encountered before delivering her sentence. She addressed the Hilton family, expressing deep sympathy and asking for their forgiveness for the pain and trauma they had endured, though she was not originally assigned to the case. Kingsbury hoped the family could find healing, as she believed it would have been Jane's wish. Turning to Michael Green, the judge encouraged him to take advantage of all the resources available through the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You hold the key to answering the questions these people have," she said, "and doing that could ultimately help you when it comes to parole." In closing, Kingsbury acknowledged the good qualities she had heard about Green from his friends. She noted that he still had much to offer and was young enough to live a productive life after his release. Ultimately, Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and was remanded to the El Dorado County Jail before being transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. The court would determine restitution after further review. Meanwhile, Ricky Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate with his family over pizza. His attorney, Melissa O'Connell, announced that Davis was entitled to over $750,000 in state compensation for his wrongful conviction. Though this sum was significant, O'Connell acknowledged it could never fully compensate for the years of freedom he had lost. Davis later filed a lawsuit seeking $18 million in damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020. His complaint named El Dorado County former detectives Richard Strazer, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who is deceased but sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig, as well as the sheriff's office pathologist, Dr. Robert Anthony. According to Village Life newspaper, Davis was homeless upon his release as of 2022. The lawsuit remains pending. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which will take effect January 1, 2024. This law prohibits law enforcement officers from using threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulation during custodial interrogations of anyone 17 or younger, despite opposition. District Attorney Vern Pearson supports the bill and urges law enforcement to end intimidation tactics. Pearson reflected that a decade ago, he might have viewed such methods differently, but after witnessing their devastating impact, he believes change is necessary. This shift comes amid research showing law enforcement's long history of presuming guilt and focusing on obtaining confessions rather than uncovering the full truth. The El Dorado County District Attorney's office now rejects any case where the primary evidence is a confession gained through threats, lies, or psychological manipulation. These measures aim to prevent wrongful convictions like Ricky Davies. Personally apologize to everyone affected by the miscarriage of justice caused by the coercive tactics used during the investigation into Jane Hilton's brutal 1985 murder. After 37 years, The true perpetrator has finally faced justice. But many lives were broken by mistakes and false accusations for the Hilton family. There is now hope for healing after decades of division, especially regarding suspicion cast on their own sister. Autumn Ricky Davis can never reclaim the freedom he lost. And Michael Green not only destroyed Jane's life, but also left a trail of pain in the years before and after the murder. What are your thoughts on this case? Did Michael Green receive a fair sentence? Does his clean record, aside from the murder, suggest anything about his intent? How could he allow an innocent man to bear the blame for his crime? And even with compensation, can Ricky Davis ever truly rebuild his life? When authorities arrived at the Winkler home, they found Matthew's body in the master bedroom. His face was covered with dried bloody foam, and the body was already stiff and cold, clear signs that he had been dead for several hours since. He was dressed in pajamas. Investigators concluded that the murder likely occurred that very morning. Matthew had been shot once in the back with a larger caliber weapon and died quickly from massive blood loss. Unable to call for help before police arrived, a crowd of neighbors, church members, and passers-by had gathered around the house. Unfortunately, their presence left numerous fingerprints and shoe prints at the scene, trampling and erasing potential evidence and complicating the investigation. Due to this contamination, it was impossible to confirm whether any intruders had been inside the house. The fate of Matthew's wife, Mary, and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria, Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, remained unknown. The family's minivan was also missing from the garage, heightening fears that Mary and the children had been kidnapped or met with similar violence. A statewide Amber Alert was issued, urging citizens to stay vigilant and help with the search. To understand the tragedy better, let's begin at the start. Matthew Brian Winkler was born on November 21, 1974, in the peaceful town of Henderson, Tennessee. He was the youngest of 3 sons, born to Dan and Diane Winkler, raised in a deeply conservative Christian household. Matthew grew up with strict values, emphasizing obedience and faith. The Winkler family had a long legacy of church leadership. Matthew was the 5th generation to enter the ministry. His father, great-uncle, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather were all preachers. His father also ran the local preacher school and was a respected figure in the community. As children, the Winkler brothers were active in Sunday school and church events. Matthew, during his youth, showed a strong interest in talent in soccer. Many believed he could have gone on to a successful athletic career, but he ultimately chose to devote himself to Bible study and church ministry because Matthew's father traveled frequently for preaching engagements. The family moved often, and Matthew attended multiple schools. Nevertheless, his outgoing personality helped him make friends easily and gain respect in each new community. After high school, the family settled in Austin, Texas. Matthew enrolled at Freed-Hardeman University and graduated successfully. He began his pastoral career as youth minister at the Central Church of Christ in McMinnville, Tennessee, before taking a preaching role at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmerton. Carol Winkler, née Freeman, was born in December 1973 in G Township, Tennessee, the eldest of 2 daughters. Mary was also raised in a strict religious household. Her father was a longtime Christian pastor, and Mary grew up attending Sunday school and church regularly. Mary's younger sister Patricia was born prematurely with severe health challenges, including cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and cognitive disabilities. Despite the parents' relentless efforts and experimental treatments, Patricia's condition showed little improvement. Mary loved her sister tenderly and cared for her deeply. Tragedy struck in 1987 when Patricia, at just 10 years old, suffered a fatal epileptic seizure while bathing. Mary had stepped out briefly and returned to find her sister unresponsive. Attempts to revive Patricia failed, leaving a profound impact on Mary at 13. Mary faced her first major loss and carried intense guilt, feeling she had somehow failed her sister. Teachers who observed Mary during this period noticed she was on the brink of a nervous breakdown deteriorating mental state led her school to refer her to a psychologist, although the sessions initially helped. Her father soon discovered what was happening and caused a scandal. Forbidding Mary from continuing therapy, he insisted that such problems should remain private and dealt with only within the family as a result. Mary never received real emotional support from her parents. Growing up shy and modest, Mary tried to avoid conflicts, but after the traumatic loss of her little sister, she became increasingly withdrawn, deprived of professional help. The trauma deepened over time, leading to serious psychological struggles following Patricia's death. The family decided to adopt a young girl named Charlotte from a troubled background soon after. They gained custody of Charlotte's two brothers and sister as well, forming a larger, blended family. Mary once again stepped into the role of the older sister, caring for the younger children while supporting her mother Matthew. And Mary Winkler's family life. Matthew and Mary met shortly after Matthew finished high school. He was a handsome, athletic, and popular young man, admired by many, yet the strict religious upbringing they both shared discouraged casual relationships. The two quickly developed a strong connection, which blossomed into love after just a few months. They met each other's families, gained their blessing, and began planning their wedding. They married in April 1994. At the time their first daughter, Patricia, was born. Matthew was still in college and had to pause his studies to take a construction job. However, he soon left the physically demanding work, as he wasn't accustomed to it. It was during this time that Mary first noticed Matthew's difficult temperament. He was frequently irritable and quick to anger over small things, yet Mary kept silent, adhering to her upbringing that taught her to obey her husband and avoid complaints initially. The couple lived near Mary's parents, allowing her to maintain close contact with them. However, tragedy struck when Mary's mother was diagnosed with rapidly progressing cancer, which claimed her life within a few months. This was another heavy blow to Mary, who suddenly found herself responsible for caring for her younger siblings. To complicate matters further, Mary was pregnant again during this time after their second daughter was born. The family moved to a new city and purchased a small house. Mary became completely absorbed in caring for the baby and gradually distanced herself from her father and younger siblings, who demanded constant attention. She also began suffering from severe postpartum depression. People close to the Winklers noticed strange changes in Mary's behavior. She became socially withdrawn, avoided making new acquaintances, and struggled to form friendships. Mood swings and melancholy overtook her, and even minor frustrations could bring her to tears. Meanwhile, Matthew's pastoral career progressed, but Mary's withdrawal deepened. The situation worsened when Mary became pregnant again, only to discover a few months later that the fetus had died in utero. This devastating loss shattered her, as she had eagerly anticipated expanding their family. Mary would not see the joy of pregnancy again until 2 years later, when she finally discovered she was expecting this time. She kept her pregnancy hidden for as long as possible, seemingly gripped by fear as her condition became obvious. Neighbors began to gossip about her strange and reclusive behavior. Mary's odd demeanor was linked not only to the deep psychological wounds from her childhood, but also to an unhealthy family environment. Matthew, the head of the household, demanded strict obedience and maintained an authoritarian presence. Though the Winklers appeared to be the perfect couple to the outside world, trusting, respectful, and harmonious, the reality was very different. Neighbors frequently overheard Matthew yelling and snapping at Mary for no clear reason. No one suspected that the respected pastor would ever raise a hand against his wife until one day Mary appeared with a large black eye, though she denied any abuse, insisting it was an accident. Rumors quickly spread throughout the town about Matthew's alleged cruelty. Mary's conservative upbringing made her view Matthew's sexual experimentation as unacceptable. She firmly resisted his advances, which only fueled his frustration. On multiple occasions, he tried to force his desires upon her. One day, after yet another abusive incident in their intimate life, Mary confided in her only close friend, breaking down in tears though her friend promised to keep the secret. The information soon spread, sparking fresh waves of gossip about the pastor's unacceptable behavior at the time. Matthew was seeking a promotion to become a local church leader, however. The rapidly spreading rumors prevented this, and he was not only passed over, but also removed from his position teaching Sunday school, a role he had held in good standing. Parents, alarmed by the whispered allegations about Matthew's unusual predilections, demanded his removal. Faced with growing scrutiny, the Winkler family relocated to a new city. Hoping for a fresh start, they settled in Slumber, where Matthew resumed his pastoral duties, and Mary took a part-time job to help support the family, though tensions remained at home. Neighbors and church members saw them as an ideal couple and a model. Family nearby lived a young married couple who quickly befriended the Winklers. The two families frequently visited one another, shared holidays, news, and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, during a dinner at the pastor's home, Mary proudly shared that Matthew had bought her a gun for self-defense. He had already taken her to the shooting range several times, where she quickly became proficient at handling firearms. In fact, the Winklers already owned several guns, purchased by Matthew for protection. Their guests wondered why the couple felt the need for weapons in a quiet town where they were well-liked and respected. After another move, the Winklers faced financial difficulties. Mary searched for various part-time jobs and even decided to pursue a medical degree to work in a clinic and help sick children. However, Mary also began engaging in financial fraud, a scheme she later claimed she did not fully understand and intended to repay once she was back on her feet. Her fraudulent activity involved artificially inflating account balances by depositing checks from unspecified sources into a joint bank account she and Matthew shared. She then changed the account's address to ensure all communications were directed to her. Mary deposited nearly $117,000 through these questionable checks, which eventually raised suspicions among bank employees. The bank attempted to meet with the couple to clarify the matter, but neither Mary nor Matthew showed up. Increasing suspicion, it was initially believed that Matthew was unaware of Mary's illegal activities. However, after Matthew's death, Mary sought to shift blame onto him, claiming in court that he had orchestrated the fraud and coerced her into making the dubious transactions, while he remained behind the scenes. When Matthew Winkler was found murdered in his home, Mary and their 3 daughters were immediately listed as missing persons, raising fears for their safety. Initially, Mary, shy and unassuming, was seen only as a potential victim, but after neighbors came forward and information about the financial fraud emerged, suspicion turned against her. Efforts were made to track Mary's bank transactions and her phone's location. She was found just a day later at an amusement park in a resort town in Alabama, seemingly trying to give her children one last joyful outing before the impending prison sentence she was facing. When questioned by police, the 2 older daughters confidently told their version of events. Intruders had broken into their home and attacked their father. Their mother had grabbed a gun to protect them, and they were forced to flee for their lives. The girls insisted their father was still alive and in the hospital, and they would soon reunite and return home. In reality, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not witness the attack themselves. They only heard a gunshot and saw their father lying on the floor. They learned the full story from their mother. Afterward, Mary placed her daughters on the floor, then quickly got them into the car and drove away. Almost immediately afterward, she began to confess, although she said she couldn't fully recall the sequence of events from that day, attributing her memory gaps to a temporary mental blur. According to Mary, her husband had abused and humiliated her for years, forcing her into unwanted forms of intimacy. She insisted that it was Matthew who had initiated the financial fraud she was later implicated in. Mary described Matthew as a man who demanded total obedience, had a quick temper, and at times resorted to physical violence. This was corroborated by Matthew's former secretary, who had witnessed him verbally berate Mary while she dutifully brought him lunch at church the night before the tragedy. The couple had a major argument that led them to sleep in separate rooms. Mary spent the night crying, and the next morning, she found herself holding a loaded shotgun Matthew kept in their home. Entering Matthew's bedroom, Mary shot him in the back. As he lay in bed, blood and foam leaked from his mouth and nose. As he collapsed, according to Mary, he whispered, "Why?" while still alive, to which she replied, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She then gathered her daughters and left the house. Experts later determined that Matthew had attempted to reach for the phone to call for help, but lacked the strength. The murder weapon was found in the trunk of the car Mary used to flee, though she never explained why. She took it with her at trial. Role-playing costumes found in the Winkler home were presented as evidence of Matthew's psychological abuse and humiliation of Mary. Upon seeing the evidence, Mary became pale and hysterical, though her testimony was inconsistent, and she offered multiple versions of the events. The court ultimately recognized her as a victim of domestic tyranny. They ruled that the murder was the tragic culmination of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, Mary was not absolved of responsibility. In April 2007, the court found her guilty of involuntary manslaughter. While it was expected she would serve at least 6 years, she was ultimately sentenced to less than 1 year. She spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital, where experts assessed whether she could regain custody of her children by summer 2008. Mary was awarded sole custody of her daughters, who had been living with Matthew's parents. The Winkler grandparents were devastated, believing Mary had deliberately killed their son and received minimal punishment despite repeated appeals. They were unsuccessful in regaining custody. The financial fraud case was never prosecuted, as the bank never filed formal charges, and the matter was dropped. Brian and Sir Ben McLaughlin purchased a 200-year-old merchant's mansion on the island of MCA in Spain, which they transformed into a boutique hotel featuring 6 luxury bedrooms and a heated outdoor pool. The couple invested approximately 25 million euros into the property and personally oversaw most of the renovations. Sir Ben's impeccable taste influenced the hotel's decor, while her culinary skills helped make it a popular destination. The hotel officially opened in January 2003, with Sir Ben's barbecues becoming a highlight for guests and locals alike. The couple frequently traveled between MCA and Ireland. However, during the holiday season from March to December, Brian often returned to Ireland more regularly, leaving Sir Ben to manage the hotel and raise their son, Daniel, alone. Friends and acquaintances later remarked that toward the end, Sir Ben appeared exhausted and unhappy, burdened by the responsibility, while there was tension whenever Brian was around. Visits from members of his large family often uplifted Sir Ben's spirits. She was fiercely independent, but deeply valued the closeness of family. A few years into their ownership of the Spanish property, Brian and Sir Ben decided to build a new house beside it in Dublin. Their plan was to either sell the original home and move into the new one, or rent out one of the properties. During a break back in Dublin in 2006, Sir Ben consulted a lawyer about legal separation. The solicitor advised her to keep a diary documenting interactions with Brian. She enrolled their son Daniel in a local school and planned to discuss moving herself and Daniel into the new house under construction. Though Sir Ben cherished what they had built in Spain, she often felt isolated, overworked, and unsupported as she tried to balance managing the hotel and raising their son with little family nearby. In the morning of Tuesday, February 28, 2006, Brian's birthday, Sir Ben's sister Neve arrived at Sir Ben's Dublin home, normally arriving at 9:00 a.m. to leave her car and catch the bus to the city. Neve was delayed until 9:30 a.m., having a key. She let herself in and found 3-year-old Daniel wandering alone downstairs. When she tried to check on Sir Ben upstairs, she found her bedroom door locked, with no response. Growing concerned, Neve called their parents, who arrived and forced open the door inside. They found Sir Ben lying near the bedroom door. Their father, Owen, touched her and realized she was cold. Sir Ben had died. She was only 38 years old. A key to the bedroom door was found on the floor. just inches away, appearing to have been pushed under the door, immediately contacted the Garda. The Irish police, upon arrival, the Garda examined the scene and suspected it was staged. Photos had been carefully placed around Serban, almost like a shrine, and a cord was partially wrapped around her neck. The cord had broken. Forensic examination revealed indentations at the top of the bedroom door, and the other end of the vacuum cleaner cord was tied around the door handle from the inside, creating the illusion that Serban had tried to hang herself. However, court testimony later revealed that the cord would have snapped within 5 seconds due to her weight, and she would have needed to be at least 6 inches off the ground to have hanged herself. These factors, along with other evidence, made it impossible for her death to be ruled a suicide. The Garda imposed a 2-day media blackout to prevent publicity and avoid the repeat of a previous case involving Rachel O'Reilly, which had drawn significant media attention before charges were filed. The blackout was lifted when Brian's mother-in-law informed him of Sir Ben's death. The McLaughlin family united in grief. While Brian received little sympathy, his sister offered some consolation, and the family referred to Sir Ben by her maiden name, suggesting they may have known information not publicly shared. Brian was questioned extensively by police. At one point, he was asked if he would hand over the clothes he was wearing for forensic testing, but he requested different clothes from the back bedroom. Police hesitated to give them to him, but eventually let him leave in his current clothes. He went to stay with his parents, along with Daniel. Later that evening, Brian returned to the house to retrieve the clothes he had been wearing, only to discover that his mother had already washed them, a suspiciously convenient action. On Thursday, March 2nd, for 9-year-old Brian was brought in for questioning and detained for 12 hours. Reports indicate that he was picked up from his parents' home, although he initially agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He later refused to answer any questions. He was released that evening. Brian informed the press that further inquiries were ongoing and that a file would be prepared for the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP. The Garda interviewed Shaban's friends and family, learning that she had been unhappy in her marriage. She had visited a solicitor weeks before her death and had sought advice from the Citizens Advice Bureau regarding separation and asset division. Family members expressed suspicion of Brian, describing him as controlling. One example given was that Shaban was made to unload the dishwasher and wash the dishes by hand because it was too expensive to run the machine. Brian controlled the finances, and Shaban needed his approval for everything. Shaban had sold her apartment and moved to Spain with Brian. One sister remarked it was Brian's dream to move to Spain, not Shaban's. Her life and social circle were in Ireland, and the move isolated her from friends and family. There was also a growing rift between Brian and the McLaughlin family. Brian delayed the funeral by 10 days, requesting a second autopsy when the death notice was published. The McLaughlin family referred to Shaban by her maiden name and did not mention Brian. They also published a separate notice in another newspaper at the funeral on March 11th. A picture of Shaban and her son Daniel was placed beside the coffin, but Brian was notably absent. The Carney and McLaughlin families sat separately in the church and did not interact, reflecting the depth of the divisions. A week after the funeral, the Garda searched the hotel in Spain owned by Brian and Shaban. Mobile phone data placed Brian at the scene of the crime around the time of Shaban's death. Witnesses reported seeing Brian in the driveway, although he claimed to be at his brother's house. Additionally, Brian's DNA was found on a section of the vacuum cleaner cordon. June 22, 2006. Brian was arrested again and questioned for 8 hours at Dundrum Garda Station before being released without charge. The Garda felt they had gathered sufficient evidence and forwarded a comprehensive file to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Meanwhile, Brian returned to Spain to prepare for the hotel's new season opening. However, cancellations and staff resignations followed, as many employees were loyal to Shaban and found it difficult to continue without her. The Garda returned to the hotel and, under oath, in front of a Spanish judge, hotel staff gave testimony about Shaban's demeanor in the weeks before her death. In December 10, 2006, Shaban's family held a vigil outside her home, where she was killed. Her sister described Shaban as the embodiment of joy, a terrific mother, an adored sister and daughter, and a true friend who would never be forgotten. Approximately 200 people attended, holding hands, singing hymns, and displaying pictures of Shaban in January 2007. Garda sources told the press they were confident an arrest would be made soon, but due to the substantial amount of evidence, it would take time to review everything. On January 17, 2007, the inquest into Shaban's death was postponed. The McLaughlin family appealed to the public for new information to secure a conviction. Against Brian, the director of public prosecutions announced that more evidence was needed to proceed with a murder charge. Brian did not attend a short hearing. On May 30, 2007, he was arrested at his home, close to his original residence with his children, and charged with Shaban's murder, brought to court. He pleaded not guilty and was denied bail. Initially, the McLaughlin family attended the hearing, while Brian avoided eye contact and chewed gum disrespectfully. On June 6, 2007, Brian was released on bail after appealing to the High Court. His release came with conditions, including surrendering his passport, paying €100, and providing a €55,000 bond from an independent guarantor. His brother, Patrick Brian, was also required to sign in weekly at Dundrum Garda Station in July. A trial date was set to begin 6 months later, with a 4-week time frame allocated for hearing all evidence and reaching a verdict. The trial started in early 2008, on February 11th. Brian appeared before Justice Barry White and a jury of 12. He pleaded not guilty. However, one juror was found to have a conflict of interest, as they worked for a home security company that had installed and serviced the Kearney residence's security system, which complicated the jury selection process. The court was initially willing to proceed with only 11 jurors, but the prosecution objected, and the judge agreed, resulting in the dismissal of the jury and the swearing in of a new one. A week later, the prosecution's case argued that Kearney had murdered Shaban, staged the scene to look like a suicide, and left their son alone before heading to work. The McLaughlin family testified about the events of that morning. Shaban's father found her deceased, and her mother recounted the morning's events, including her interactions with Kearney. Deja explained that when Kearney arrived home, she informed him of Shaban's death. However, during a phone call earlier, she had not told him what was wrong, and Kearney never asked. Deja also confirmed that Shaban had admitted herself to the St. John of God's psychiatric unit in 1999 after suffering stress at work and what was described as a minor breakdown. She stayed 5 days before returning to work. Bridget, Shaban's sister, stated that in 2005, Kearney called to say Shaban was struggling with her nerves again, but when Bridget checked on her, Shaban was fine. Co-worker from Colors Electrical reported that Kearney usually arrived at work between 8:30 and 9 o'clock a.m., but on the morning of the murder, he showed up unusually early. Between 7:50 and 8 o'clock a.m., a solicitor confirmed that multiple letters regarding separation had been sent to Kearney, none of which he responded to. Kearney's statement to the Garda was read aloud. On the morning of Shaban's death, he noticed her door was locked the previous night. Shaban and Daniel had returned home around 8:30 p.m. Kearney put Daniel to bed and slept in the same room, while Shaban slept in the master bedroom the next morning. They woke at 7 o'clock a.m. during breakfast. Kearney put on a DVD for Daniel, then went upstairs to brush his teeth. He tried to enter Shaban's locked room, called out that he was leaving, kissed Daniel goodbye, and left for work. The court adjourned when a juror fell ill, but reconvened the next day. Evidence showed Shaban could not have hanged herself. The pathologist found marks on her neck and chin, including 3 larynx fractures, blood, and abrasions. On the chin, the neck injuries were inconsistent with hanging. Significant force was applied, indicating assault. Shaban had been strangled and gripped around the neck, with a ligature used to hasten her death. Security guards reported no signs of forced entry. The house's windows and doors were intact. The alarm system had been activated at 10:50 p.m. the previous night, deactivated shortly after, then reactivated at 7:37 a.m. the next morning before being turned off. Again, a thorough search of the Kearney residence uncovered a diary in the airing cupboard, confirmed by Shaban's sister to be her writing. Shaban's solicitor had advised her to keep a diary documenting her marriage. Additionally, Shaban's passport was found wrapped in sheets and clothing, and a €500 note was discovered hidden among wrapping paper. A financial forensic expert testified that although Kearney owned properties in Ireland and had stakes in an electrical business and the hotel, he was eccentric but cash-poor. Closing arguments began on March 3rd. The defense argued that the prospect of splitting from Siobhan was financially inconvenient for Kearney. He wanted to sell one of the houses in Nakesh, but if Siobhan wanted to move into one, that would not be possible, and Kearney would have to manage his debts differently. They pointed out that Siobhan's efforts to save money, hide her passport, keep a diary, and send solicitor letters demonstrated her seriousness about leaving and that she was planning a future, showing she was not suicidal. Forensic evidence also indicated it was nearly impossible for her to have taken her own life. Kearney admitted that only he, Siobhan, and their son were present that night. The defense urged caution, emphasizing that the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. They highlighted what was missing: no history of violence, custody disputes, alcohol abuse, or jealousy. The jury was told to disregard the emotional testimony from the McLaughlin family. Although coercive control, a form of domestic abuse, does not always leave visible marks, the family described many instances of extreme control, such as Kearney forcing Siobhan to hand-wash dishes because it cost too much to run the dishwasher. When Siobhan finally sought legal advice, Kearney was unable to cope and took her life. Coercive control is now increasingly recognized as a serious form of domestic abuse, even without physical violence. Some March 4th. The court prepared for further proceedings. Justice Barry White mistakenly referred to the victim as Rachel instead of Siobhan during his summation, a serious error. This confusion arose because he was simultaneously overseeing the case of Rachel O'Reilly. He later apologized for the mix-up. Interestingly, both women had died within 18 months of each other under similar circumstances, and their cases would often be mentioned together that evening. The jury was dismissed, but they returned the following night with a verdict: guilty of murder. By a majority of 11-1, the McLaughlin family broke down in tears and embraced as the verdict sank, and Kearney showed no visible reaction, but his daughter, sitting beside him, wept. Kearney removed his wedding ring and handed it, along with his wallet, to her. Kearney was immediately sentenced to life imprisonment. The McLaughlin family requested to deliver a victim impact statement, but this was denied, a decision that remains unclear. Kearney was then escorted to a van and taken to Whitfield Prison. To begin his sentence, he lodged an appeal immediately, which was heard in 2009. However, a 3-judge panel dismissed the appeal in 2012. Kearney was also denied permission to take his case to the Supreme Court 7 years later. In 2019, Kearney's parole applications were rejected twice. His sister revealed on a local radio station that the parole board had recommended him for 2 supervised family visits, suggesting they were preparing him for eventual release. However, the board would only approve his release if he admitted guilt, a step Kearney has never taken. As of 2022, the Minister for Justice has the final say on any release, but Kearney remains incarcerated while in prison. Kearney trained as a counselor to support other inmates' mental health and volunteered with the PS Americans organization. He also acquired first aid certification. Initially decided to sell the Spanish hotel they owned, but later withdrew it from the market in 2010. Since then, his brother Patrick and wife have managed the hotel, which remains open. Though ownership may have changed, Kearney expressed a desire to keep the hotel to support his son's education. The McLaughlin family sought to adopt Daniel, though details of whether this occurred and how he is faring remain unclear. Both Daniel and his half-sister Aisling deserve peace after such tragedy. In 2008, the house where Shaban was murdered was put up for sale for €14 million, presumably sold since Kearney's daughter lived in their new home while he was still free. But little is known about her current situation. If Kearney liquidates his assets, he stands to gain a significant fortune and could become a millionaire upon release. The family considered suing him for Shaban's share, at least, but no public details are available. Shaban's sister Aisling released a heartfelt statement after the conviction, expressing that, while their lives were shattered by Shaban's death, justice had finally been served. She described Shaban as a source of joy, love, and laughter their beloved Shawnee, and said they miss her every moment, burdened by the unbearable longing to see and protect her, even though they know it's too late. Hello friends, welcome to our channel today. We will look at another heartbreaking case, the disappearance of Alicia Ross, a young Canadian woman who vanished without a trace from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. The police were unable to find her body or any significant evidence, and the investigation stalled. The case might have remained unsolved had the perpetrator not turned himself in. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in Markham, Ontario. Little is known about her biological parents, who gave up their rights. Shortly after her birth, she was adopted as an infant by Marvin and Sharon Ross, who provided her with love and support to nurture her talents. When Alicia started school, her adoptive parents divorced, but remained friendly and involved in her life. Sharon remarried Julius Forrest, who treated Alicia like his own daughter. Alicia excelled academically, showed talent in drawing, and developed a passion for photography and travel after school. Alicia spent a year exploring Australia before returning home to enroll in university. In the summer of 2005, the 25-year-old Alicia went on a hiking trip with friends, where she met Sean, a man 4 years her senior despite the age difference. They quickly formed a romantic relationship. On August 16th, Alicia went for a walk in the park with her adoptive mother and their dogs. Appearing cheerful and content, Alicia had shared with those close to her that she was expecting a promotion at work, set to become a senior sales manager. She was very proud, having worked diligently for a long time, and felt that her hard work was finally about to pay off. She also spoke openly about her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month despite the short time. Alicia seemed deeply in love and hopeful that their relationship would develop into something meaningful. She expressed a desire to introduce Sean to her adoptive parents by organizing a family dinner after their walk in the park. Alicia's mother returned home while Alicia went out on a date with Sean. She promised she wouldn't be long, as she needed to wake early for work the next day. When her promotion decision was due, the two said their goodbyes and parted ways, unaware it would be the last time Sharon would see her daughter alive. The mysterious disappearance happened from Alicia's own home that evening. Alicia had invited Sean over, and they spent a pleasant time together. Around midnight, Sean left, and Alicia walked him to the door at the backyard exit. They kissed goodbye, and Sean promised to call once he got home. True to his word, Sean called Alicia around midnight, but got no answer, assuming she had already fallen asleep. He was not immediately worried, however, when he tried again the following morning with no response. Concern grew, prompting him to contact a mutual colleague, who worked with Elisha. From the colleague, Sean learned Alicia had not come to work, and he rushed to her home on the morning of August 17th. Sharon and Julius planned to play golf with friends. Leaving home around 10 a.m., they noticed Alicia's car was still in the driveway, but assumed someone else was using it, and went about their day. Shortly after, Sean arrived at Alicia's house, but could not find her. He called the police to report her missing, and then contacted Sharon. The couple hurried home to find police already on the scene. Sean was the first to report Alicia's disappearance, and the last person to see her. He told the police that he and Alicia had parted ways at the gate around midnight, and had not heard from her. Sharon entered Alicia's room. She immediately noticed all of Alicia's personal belongings were untouched: her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, bank cards, and cash remained in place. This suggested Alicia had no intention of leaving or going anywhere. Without these essentials, the backyard gate was found open but not forced, indicating that Alicia either willingly let someone in or left with someone she knew. Police noted a disturbed patch of lawn and trampled flowers, as if someone had fallen there nearby. They found a pair of cigarettes and Alicia's right sandal laid out in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her family smoked, and Sean denied smoking that brand of cigarettes. The owner and significance of the cigarettes remained unclear. Sean quickly became the prime suspect. He appeared visibly nervous, and his account was somewhat inconsistent. He was also the first to report Alicia missing before notifying her parents, which raised suspicion that he was aware of her absence earlier than he claimed. Biological samples found on Alicia's bed contained traces from both her and Sean. Investigators speculated that Alicia may have refused Sean intimacy that night, and in response, he might have forced himself on her and then staged her disappearance to cover up a potential crime. When Sean was brought in for questioning and presented with this theory, he was shocked and distressed at being considered the prime suspect. He insisted he would never harm Alicia. Expressing love for her, he confirmed they had been intimate that evening, but claimed it was consensual. Friends and family spoke highly of Sean, saying Alicia never reported any arguments or mistreatment. Their relationship was progressing happily, and Alicia had plans for a future with him. Moreover, Alicia's parents emphasized she had no reason or intention to leave. She was eagerly awaiting her promotion and, as a responsible person, would never leave without informing her family or taking her essential belongings. Without sufficient evidence or grounds to detain Sean, the police were unable to hold him after questioning Sean at the police station. Authorities released him due to lack of evidence. However, law enforcement did not eliminate him as a suspect and continued to monitor his activities closely. Sean appeared visibly distressed and dejected throughout this period. The search for Alicia intensified the day after her disappearance. Investigators conducted a thorough inspection of her home and yard, carefully examined the surrounding neighborhood, and interviewed nearby residents. Despite these efforts, no one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night she vanished. Police theorized that Alicia had disappeared sometime between midnight when she said goodbye to Sean and sunrise, a period when the streets are typically quiet and deserted, making it difficult to find witnesses. Alicia's photographs were circulated widely throughout the city in flyers, including contact numbers for anyone with information to come forward. Her story captured significant media attention and was featured extensively in newspapers and popular publications. This public interest spurred hundreds of volunteers and concerned citizens to join the search. Though police received numerous tips daily, most turned out to be false or unrelated. Nonetheless, every lead was investigated thoroughly in hopes of finding a breakthrough. The search area expanded continuously, including abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and wastelands. Despite being the prime suspect, Sean actively participated in the search efforts, feeling wronged by public suspicion. He gave a heartfelt interview to the media, expressing his deep love for Alicia and sharing photos of happier times together tearfully. He pleaded for help in finding her, appearing utterly devastated. The search operation became one of the largest in Ontario's history, with even ravines and marshlands scoured meticulously, yet no clues or leads emerged regarding Alicia's whereabouts. Her parents made public appeals, expressing their hope that Alicia was still alive, but being held against her will. They implored whoever had her to let her return home safely and unharmed. Sean's unexpected arrest later led investigators to lean toward the theory that Alicia's abductor was someone she knew personally. This was supported by the absence of any signs of forced entry or struggle, and the fact that the gate was found open. However, no concrete evidence was uncovered. The cigarettes found on the ground had a heavily smudged fingerprint that could not be identified. Investigators reviewed Alicia's contacts, phone records, emails, and messages but found no suspicious act. The 6th day of the search, the case was officially reclassified as a criminal investigation. Though Sean remained the main suspect, Sean lived alone about 10 miles from Alicia's home. After realizing public suspicion had intensified, especially following his media interview, he withdrew from the search and refused further comment to the press. Investigators questioned Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent when offered a polygraph test. He refused, which only strengthened the police's suspicions of his involvement. 2 weeks after Alicia's disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge, driving under the influence and resisting arrests, sparking speculation that he might be trying to drown his guilt in alcohol following his arrest. Alicia's parents gave another interview, revealing they had never personally known Sean and only heard about him through Alicia. While they believed their daughter was happy, they now wondered if she had hidden certain truths to avoid upsetting them, even though she had planned to introduce Sean to her family. Soon police also interviewed Sean's neighbors to see if anyone had noticed unusual behaviors, such as disposing of large trash bags, acting suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or cleaning his car. But no significant leads came from these inquiries. Detectives hoped Sean might eventually confess. But a month after Alicia's disappearance, media coverage began to fade. Although the search continued, the case no longer dominated headlines, and the investigation seemed stalled. Then, in a surprising turn on September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Alicia vanished, 1-year-old Daniel Sylvester, a local man with no previous suspicion, called the police. He confessed to causing Alicia's death and revealed the location of her body. At first, Daniel Sylvester's confession was met with skepticism, as many believed he sought attention by claiming responsibility for one of the region's most notorious cases. However, those doubts were quickly dispelled when police located Alicia's body exactly where he had described. Daniel Sylvester was an unemployed recluse living with his mother in a house adjacent to the Ross family home. The two properties were separated by thick, overgrown shrubs, forming a nearly impenetrable barrier despite their close proximity. Daniel and Alicia had virtually no interaction. Alicia had occasionally seen him on his property and regarded him as mentally unwell due to his odd behavior. Initially, police had no reason to suspect Daniel, as he appeared to be a withdrawn individual who kept to himself and had not drawn any attention from a young age. Daniel struggled socially, facing ridicule at school and repeated failures in forming friendships. This led to a deep-seated resentment toward women. Girls would mock him, calling him a loser and rejecting any association with him. By the age of 8, Daniel was diagnosed with a social behavioral disorder and began psychological treatment, though the therapy provided limited improvement during his teenage years. He admitted to having violent fantasies about overpowering girl specialists, however, believed these thoughts would remain fantasies and not translate into real actions. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy and chose not to pursue further education. He became increasingly isolated, spending most of his time alone in his room, often browsing adult websites. Occasionally, he would sneak out at night to secretly watch his neighbors, particularly when they engaged in intimate acts, which excited him. Despite this, Daniel remained a virgin well into his 30s, fulfilling his desires through solitary means. His neighbors rarely saw him and considered him harmless. Daniel initially claimed the killing was accidental, and that he hid Alicia's body to avoid punishment. He said that upon realizing she was lifeless, he placed her body in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles outside of town, hiding her in a dense ravine by a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing the body would be discovered, he moved it again under the cover of darkness to a more remote location. The exact spot where police eventually found her remains. The state of Alicia's body shocked forensic experts. The injuries suggested extreme cruelty, resembling trauma caused by a car accident. The autopsy revealed nearly all her ribs were broken, along with fractures to her neck and both arms, plus severe closed cranial trauma accompanied by internal bleeding, although the exact cause of death could not be determined. Multiple injuries were incompatible with life. Experts described the brutality as unprecedented in their experience. Authorities needed to establish a clear timeline and circumstances of that tragic night to understand how Alicia sustained such horrific injuries. Daniel initially stated that an argument broke out between him and Alicia on a bush-covered path between their homes during the altercation. Alicia allegedly called him a loser, which enraged him, leading to him striking her on the head when she collapsed. He reportedly kicked her several times in the chest, realizing she was no longer breathing. He hid her body and later moved it when the search area expanded. However, key details in his account were missing or inconsistent. It remained unclear why Daniel was at Alicia's home late at night, what triggered the argument, and what caused the vicious beating. Evidence at the scene was laid out in a straight line, complicating efforts to reconstruct the full sequence of events. Investigators discovered that Daniel had been spying on his neighbors. He observed Alicia and Sean being intimate through a window, then retreated to the bushes, but remained nearby. Just before midnight, as the couple kissed by the gate, Sean left. Alicia returned to the yard, only to notice Daniel still lurking. Realizing he had been spying on her and Sean, Alicia became furious. She yelled at Daniel, calling him a pervert and demanding he leave. Immediately when she called him a loser, the very insult that haunted Daniel since childhood had triggered a violent reaction. Overcome with rage, Daniel struck Alicia forcefully on the head, knocking her to the ground. She tried to resist, grabbing his hair, but he responded by choking her when his grip loosened momentarily. Daniel stood up and began kicking her while she was defenseless, lying on the ground. Daniel Sylvester relentlessly struck Alicia's chest, back, neck, and head. Forensic experts later documented 33 fractures across her body, alongside severe internal bleeding. Upon realizing Alicia was dead, Daniel moved her body to his garage. There, he undressed her and, according to his testimony, masturbated to relieve his tension. Importantly, forensic examination confirmed that he did not sexually assault her afterward. He placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and transported it to a remote location outside the city. Upon returning home, he showered, changed clothes, and acted as if nothing had happened. The victim's belongings, his clothes, and the towels used to clean the crime scene were wrapped in trash bags and discarded. The trial and sentencing only began in April 2007, when new details came to light. Although Daniel admitted to ending Alicia's life, both he and his lawyer insisted the killing was unintentional. The defense requested a psychiatric evaluation, arguing that Daniel was mentally ill and should be treated in a clinic rather than imprisoned. The prosecution countered that despite his mental health issues and anger management problems, Daniel acted with full awareness of his actions. Consequences: he had kicked Alicia mercilessly, fully aware it would likely result in her death. Court-ordered psychiatric assessment ultimately confirmed that Daniel was fully responsible for his actions regarding the items found arranged in a straight line in the backyard. Daniel never admitted to placing them there. On May 7, 2007, Daniel Sylvester was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 16 years. In 2008, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards released a song titled Alicia Ross, portraying Alicia's perspective during her final moments. In March 2008, the United States was rocked by a major political scandal leading to the resignation of New York Governor Eliot Spitzer, known as a tough prosecutor and champion of ethical governance, earning the nickname Sheriff of Wall Street. Spitzer's career ended abruptly after it was revealed he was involved with a high-end prostitution ring. The scandal broke on March 10, 2008, when the New York Times reported that Spitzer had been a client of the Emperor's Club VIP, a luxury prostitution service. The investigation showed that Spitzer had arranged a rendezvous with a prostitute named Kristen at a Washington, D.C. hotel in February 2008. This revelation was particularly shocking given Spitzer's prior efforts to combat organized crime and prostitution, as New York's Attorney General federal authorities had been investigating the Emperor's Club VIP for months, intercepting communications that eventually implicated identified as Client 9, while Spitzer was not immediately charged. His involvement carried serious legal implications. Prostitution is illegal in most U.S. states, and transporting individuals across state lines for prostitution violates the Mann Act, a federal statute, facing intense political pressure. Spitzer resigned on March 12, effective March 17. In his resignation speech, he stated, "I cannot allow my private failings to disrupt the people's work." His downfall marked a stunning collapse for a man once hailed as a rising star in the Democratic Party. The scandal reignited debates about the private lives of public officials and whether personal misconduct should impact their ability to serve. Some argued that private indiscretions should be separate from professional duties, while others believed such behavior demonstrated poor judgment and integrity, rendering officials unfit for office. The case also highlighted the challenges law enforcement faces in regulating prostitution, especially when involving high-profile individuals. After his resignation, Spitzer attempted to rebuild his life, making media appearances and running unsuccessfully for New York City Controller in 2013. The Elliot Spitzer scandal remains a cautionary tale about the fragility of public trust and the consequences of personal misconduct, sparking ongoing debates about privacy and accountability in politics. Investigators uncovered evidence that Elliot Spitzer had used the alias George Fox to arrange his illicit meetings. On February 13, 2008. He booked a hotel room at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., where he met with a woman identified as Kristen. Bank records showed he wired $4,300 for the encounter, a substantial amount that raised questions about the depth of his involvement with the escort service. In the days following the revelations, Spitzer's political allies quickly abandoned him. Supporters who had once praised his integrity distanced themselves, unwilling to be connected to the scandal. The Democratic Party, already facing a contentious election year, viewed Spitzer's downfall as a damaging distraction. High-profile figures such as Senator Hillary Clinton and presidential hopeful Barack Obama refrained from detailed comments, though behind closed doors there was concern about the impact on the party's image. Public reaction was mixed, ranging from outrage and disappointment to morbid fascination. Many saw Spitzer as a hypocritical politician, undone by his own vices, while others debated whether private failings should end a political career. Comparisons were drawn to previous political sex scandals, like Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. However, Spitzer's case stood out due to his aggressive prosecution of prostitution rings, making the irony particularly stark to the public and media alike. The scandal took a heavy toll on Spitzer's personal life. His wife, Silda Wall Spitzer, stood beside him during his resignation speech on March 12, but the strain on their marriage was evident. Images of a visibly distressed Silda became emblematic of the collateral damage wrought by political and personal betrayals. Years later, the couple quietly divorced, underscoring the lasting consequences of the scandal. Legally, Spitzer faced a precarious situation while prostitution was illegal in most states. The more serious concern was whether he violated the Mann Act, which prohibits transporting individuals across state lines for prostitution. After extensive deliberations, federal prosecutors decided not to file charges against him, citing insufficient grounds. Despite escaping legal penalties, career and reputation were irreparably damaged. The scandal sparked wider discussions about high-end escort services and the blurred lines between legality, morality, and discretion. The Emperor's Club VIP was no ordinary prostitution ring. It catered to the wealthy elite, maintaining an exclusive veil that kept its operations largely hidden from public scrutiny. Its exposure raised questions about how many other influential figures might have been involved, though few names ever surfaced for Spitzer. The path to redemption was uncertain. Some believed he could eventually make a political comeback. Others saw him as a permanently tarnished cautionary figure, retreating from the spotlight after his resignation. He became a symbol of self-inflicted downfall in the months following. Spitzer largely withdrew from public life, though his name remained synonymous with scandal. The political world moved on, but for Spitzer, the consequences lingered no longer. The feared prosecutor or ambitious governor. He was now Client 9, the man who destroyed his own career with a single reckless act. However, Spitzer did not remain out of the public eye for long. By 2009, he was making appearances as a political analyst, providing commentary on legal and financial issues. While some dismissed him as a fallen politician clinging to relevance, others appreciated his sharp intellect and insight. Networks saw value in his expertise, and soon he had a new platform, not as a lawmaker, but as a media personality. In 2010, Spitzer made a bold attempt to revive his public image by co-hosting Parker Spitzer, a primetime political talk show on CNN. However, the show struggled with ratings and public opinion was divided. Some found him engaging and knowledgeable, while others couldn't move past the scandal that ended his career. The show was canceled after less than a year, underscoring the challenges he faced and shaking his damaged reputation. Undeterred, Spitzer ran for New York City Controller in 2013, a lower profile, but still significant political office. His campaign reignited debates about redemption and whether disgraced politicians deserve second chances. Ultimately, voters were not ready to forgive, and Spitzer lost the Democratic primary to Scott Stringer, signaling the effective end of his political ambitions. Meet Kristen Real, named Ashley Duper, faced intense media scrutiny after being thrust into the spotlight. She gave interviews and eventually transitioned to a new career in entertainment. Unlike Spitzer, she managed to distance herself from the scandal and later married and started a family. The Emperor's Club VIP was dismantled, with several operators arrested and charged. Though their sentences were comparatively light given the scandal's fallout, the case highlighted the double standards in public life, where those in power often suffer harsher public judgment and legal consequences. Over the years, Spitzer faded from political relevance. Though he occasionally made headlines, his marriage to Silda ended in divorce, and he was later involved in other controversies, including an assault allegation in 2016. Though no charges were filed ultimately, the Spitzer scandal was more than a political downfall. It was a cautionary tale about how power, ambition, and personal failings can collide with devastating results. His story serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of public trust and the intense scrutiny faced by those in authority. Eliot Spitzer's legacy remains one of contrasts, a brilliant reformer undone by the very temptations he once vowed to eradicate in politics, as in life. Reputation can be both a shield and a sword, one that can be lost in an instant, often without chance for full recovery.